Everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to our town meeting information session. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Tony Mizuko. I'm the town manager here in Norwood. Can the folks online just wave if you can hear us? All right, that waves. I think they can hear us. As we go through the warrant tonight and take questions on them, we'll give a brief introduction to the warrant. We'll take questions. If a question comes to you later in the night, we can go back. If we get a lot of questions, we'll just sort of hold through, get to the end, and then go back in order and answer as many questions as we can about each item on the article, on the warrant. We do have the capital plan presentation tonight, so that in and of itself is probably 20 or 25 slides that we'll go through. And as we go through it, it'll seem like we're going through relatively quickly, but we can always stop and answer questions on any of the items in the capital plan as well. Town meeting is November 13th. We are looking forward to seeing all of you there. This is a hybrid meeting, and it is being recorded, and it will be broadcast on NCM, and we'll get it out to town meeting members who could not be here tonight, as well as out on our website and our social media. We're joined by a number of town staff today who have articles on the warrant, as well as Anne Marie Mazzola, who is chair of the school committee, and Bob Donnelly, vice chair of the Board of Selectmen. So, with that, we're going to go ahead and jump right into the warrant. The best place to probably follow along would either be the warrant or the yellow sheet, which has the explanation. As I said, some of these will go through fairly quickly. Some might take a little bit more time. So we're going to jump right to Article 1. If anyone can't hear me or if I'm in the way, let me know. Article 1 would make a couple of changes to our town meeting bylaw. That's how we conduct business for town meeting. Namely, member badges would no longer include a photo, name, and district number. Many towns just have either a card or something similar. For years in Norwood, we had an actual badge that had your picture on it. We actually stopped doing that during COVID, so we figured we should probably catch up with the practice. It is a lot of administrative work to have members go in, get a picture, get it put on the badge, they bring it home, they forget it. The town clerk staff is always grabbing you as you're leaving town meeting to make sure they can grab your badge. So this would do away with it. You would just have a generic badge. We would also allow a show of hands to be included as a manner of taking votes. We've always done this. We've never just included it in our bylaw, so it's just considered that practice included in the bylaw as a means of taking votes. What this would also do is it would allow electronic voting as a means for town meeting members to vote at town meeting. And I'll talk about that in just a second. The first two items are relatively perfunctory. This is the only real change. And there was a town meeting study committee it was before the pandemic, so I think that was only 4 years ago, but it feels like it was 40 years ago. But just before the pandemic, a town meeting study committee came together, town meeting members looked at the issue of electronic voting at town meeting, decided it would be good for the town, and that we should move forward with it. It sort of got placed in the parking lot as we went through the pandemic, but it was recently brought up by the moderator again that we should look into it and make it happen. And all that means is as town meeting members, you'll get a clicker when you go into town meeting, not this fall, we have to actually approve it first, go out and do the purchasing. You'll get a clicker, and then when it comes to a vote, you'll click the button to record the vote. Fairly simple and straightforward. 10 years ago, there were a handful of towns that did this. Now it seems to be the norm. Somehow even towns with open town meeting are able to do this. I don't know how they give out 500 clickers, then hope that not only 500 people have shown up, but we would order enough clickers for every town meeting member, and you would get your clicker as you go into town meeting. Questions? All right. Article 2 is a revision to the size of town meeting. Our town meeting bylaw, which is a special act, sets the size at town meeting at a percentage of voters, 1.5% of registered voters. After the last census, what that did is it kicked us up to about 300 town meeting members from about the 250 we had before. That's a huge jump to try to recruit that many town meeting members. It's a huge jump not just for town meeting members. Picture any civic organization that you're familiar with, a church, a Rotary, a Masonic Club, a PTO. To try to get that many people and increase the size that much is not likely to happen. There was, again, a study committee formed. The town clerk and a member of the Board of Selectmen were part of that, and a number of town meeting members. I believe a few of them are even here. I was there for the first couple of meetings and then politely let the committee do its work and then didn't show up for several months, but they came to a conclusion that the size we had for town meeting prior to this change was probably about the right size for us. So what this bylaw would actually do is reduce us from 297 to 261, which is about where we were before. We still have a number of open town meeting seats. That's still something we want to address, but rather than dramatically change the number in one fell swoop, we figured we'd bring it back to where it was, probably a good number for us, and then maybe in the future you look at it, maybe it goes up, maybe it goes down. We would do this by adjusting the percentage of registered voters that count as town meeting members, would count as town meeting members.
Yeah, what is the current percentage
It's
of
1.5.
town meeting members per resident?
1.5%, it's going to 1.25 of registered voters.
Of registered voters?
Yes.
Not a population?
Correct, not a population. The size of town meeting varies quite a bit among communities. We are unique in that it's a percentage of registered voters. A lot of towns, it's a number that they have just had for some reason for many years and carried and carried and carried. Some towns have a number per district and that's how they calculate it. Some have some sort of a population. Ours, since the 40s, has been 1.5% of registered voters. Clearly, our population has changed significantly since then. 300 would be very large for a town meeting body for any of the towns in the Commonwealth. Ed?
So I understand the need for cleaning up the seats, but the question I have is, when I've always looked at the numbers, I've always seen certain districts have more people than other districts, and therefore other districts are not, either they can't participate or just not represented in the same amount. I mean, how does that factor into this change?
So there are some districts that perpetually have open seats, and there are some districts that perpetually have competition. The number is roughly, it's completely even by district, Mary Lou? She's here somewhere. Yeah, so sometimes you have an odd year, depending on how it is, where you got a different number per district, but it's an even number per district. We just struggle to recruit in certain districts. But election to town meeting is by district. You do represent your district, but it is a town-wide body. So you could make the argument that, do you represent your district, and is a certain part of town underrepresented? You have the whole body there to represent you. Carol?
Districts are roughly the same number of population?
Yes, more or less. And that does change every 10 years with the census. Some of you 2 years ago got redistricted somewhat unceremoniously. Some of you have been in the same district for many, many years. Sometimes we had to make a change on one street where all of a sudden you're here and now you're there. We try to do that. We have to do it every 10 years when we redistrict. Paul?
Just a question with respect to the districts that cannot fill the town seats.
Mm-hmm.
Are these single-family home districts, or are these tenement, multifamily? I'd like to know just the
Mary Lou, is it
disparity.
District 5 and 6?
It's mostly 5, no, 6 is fine, but it's mostly 5 that we have a problem with.
Which is it?
Is that a heavily-
Gardens and there's a lot of, there's
Yeah.
somewhat of tenant population there.
Okay.
That's really the only one we have a big problem with, most of the time.
Thank you.
Yep. Other questions on the size bylaw? Yep.
I love contested seats generally in government. I think it's great, but I do notice that we've increased by like 26 over the last election. So we're minimizing the gap of the number of open seats, and so I'm wondering, when we have that positive momentum, are our recruitment, mechanisms working and giving that more time? Because I'd love to see our seats filled, maybe with a bigger cross-section of the community.
Sure. One of the challenges, and the Town Meeting Studies Committee took this up quite a bit, is towns tend to recruit a certain number of town meeting members, and for whatever reason, there is something inherent in the culture of each community. That's how they operate, and it seems to be the same. We found consistently over 30 years or so, about 145 people vote on every major issue at town meeting in town. Now, that's people recorded voting. There are a lot of you who sit in the audience and don't raise a hand, but that number was strangely consistent regardless of issue throughout the last 20 or 30 years. I think the highest vote count we had was for the high school override vote, and that was maybe 212 people voting. So even one of the biggest issues coming to the, might have been 220, coming to the town in a 20 or 30 year period, we still never maxed out. It might be that even in that 250 or 260 range, that's just too many for a town that fundamentally has 30,000 people. Now we're up to a little over 31,000 with the latest census. The actual number's probably a little bit higher, but 50 years ago we had about 30,000 people. So our population really hasn't changed since the 70s. It might just be that that's a saturation number. And we always want to work on more recruitment. We'd like a little bit of competition. Nobody wants it, so just write your name in and you get in. And I can tell you that's actually a problem the clerk's office has, where somebody thinks it's funny to write their name in, and then their spouse writes their name in, and then technically that means they've been elected at town meeting, and then they don't want to show up, and they don't want to actually have to do it, and we have to go through a whole paperwork process. That's something we may want to see if we can address at some point in the bylaw, and I know we looked at it, whether it requires 10 write-ins to actually get a seat rather than just people writing in Mickey Mouse. But we might just be at that saturation of the total number of people interested. Other questions on the town meeting bylaw? Again, we can always circle back to it. Article 3 is an amendment to the Permanent Building Construction Committee bylaw. We've had a PBCC in one form or another for since I believe the late 1950s. They were originally responsible for being the committee that would oversee construction on any town projects. Over time, a couple of things have changed. State law changed about 30 years ago with procurement, or about 20 years ago, where any project over a certain size, we were required to hire a project manager. So construction committees used to take the role of that project manager. The idea of a permanent building construction committee, towns still use them when they're undergoing a lot of construction. We're really not undergoing that much construction of municipal facilities. Again, having had roughly the same population for the last 50 years, we built most of our elementary schools in a 20-year period. We built the high school 10 years ago. We're building the middle school now. We're probably 10 years between our next school construction project. Town Hall was built in the 20s. We had the public safety building in early 2000, DPW 2015. So we're not really building new buildings at the rate that a lot of other towns are, where they didn't have some of the core facilities that we did. We're never going to get rid of the library, but there are towns that have built libraries. The DPW building went where it was. So that is to say that between changes in procurement law and the fact that we're not really building a whole lot of brand new buildings, we don't really have a need for a standing permanent building construction committee. Over time, they started to get into renovation projects, and it's sort of hard to do a renovation project by committee. There's not the same level of decision making. There's not the same level of real flexibility. If you're replacing a boiler in a 90-year-old elementary school, there's really only so many ways you can replace the boiler in that 90-year-old elementary school. So we made a few changes a couple years ago when our facilities department was created, and this sort of cements that by effectively eliminating the permanent building construction committee, enshrining that construction of facilities is responsible to the facilities department, and again, we still have to follow state procurement for having an owner's project manager, and that the town can still create a building committee if and when we're actually looking at building a new building that doesn't have a framework like a school, which the state makes you set a whole separate committee of who needs to be on it and how that works. But if we were to build a new library, or I guess a second library, or a second public safety building, we would still put together a committee. You would still want we used to call them Committee of 21, people getting involved in that. We're just not doing a whole lot of that. And even, as I said, the next major construction project we'll probably undertake other than the middle school, maybe a renovation of Town Hall in 5 or 6 years, the envelope of the building is not going to change. So those projects aren't really designed or geared towards a committee making those types of decisions. We've also learned from the mistakes in the past. Sometimes being on a building committee, it's hard to understand what their charge is. They don't want to spend money in a way that people would be upset with, so they may want to bring a project under budget, but the folks who have approved for it and paid for it want the project to work in a certain way. So it just would allow us to make sure that there's a little bit more of a professional eye internally and externally on any projects the town is undertaking. As I said, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, we created facilities. This is sort of finally recognizing that we have a full operating facilities department. Questions on the bylaw change? Right along. Actually, oh, yep, go ahead.
So this changes I would say the management of a project that's been approved, correct?
Yes.
So the determination or design of a project before it actually gets handed to management, has that changed at all, or that's not being affected by this?
Not necessarily being affected. It's going to depend on the size and the scope of a project. Again, a boiler, I think we did we'll go to those boards in a minute. So, so the middle school is a great example. The state has a framework for building committees for schools. We have to follow that. They're going to be the committee that decides the design and whatnot. If we were building a new building from scratch and we set up a new committee, they'd probably be involved in that design process as the new committee for constructing a new building. We're just not likely doing that anytime soon, and if we did, you'd want to make sure that there was the support. Hey, we need a new civic. Okay, we're going to put the civic building committee together. We'll have had some preliminary or feasibility design at that point. We know we're building a building of X thousand square feet, and then there's a place for a committee to play a role in that design. Planning, zoning, school committee if it's a school building, the selectmen if it's a town building, everyone else still has their same functional role to play.
That's what I was going to say. Does the community input still take place?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's not going to change. Okay, Diane, go right ahead. You want to unmute?
Hi, so, I have a question, it might be naive, but how does this affect town-owned historical buildings?
It wouldn't, we likely wouldn't have a building committee for a town-owned historic property. I think technically Town Hall and the chapel are the only historic properties we own. So it wouldn't have any impact. If we were doing a renovation project at one of those properties, the facilities department is the town's lead on any of those projects. They don't make independent decisions. They're just a service provider, but they're our professional facilities department that takes the lead in any of our internal construction projects.
So like the Morse House and
Would have no
Other
impact.
t-
Yeah, would have no impact on the Morse House.
Okay,
Yes. Doesn't take away any authority any boards have over their buildings or what they do. It's just really, there's no longer a standing PBCC that would manage construction projects.
okay.
Alright. Moving on to Article 4, this would allow us to charge interest on police and fire details. The town provides police and fire details at the request of private entities. Sometimes we require them, sometimes the law requires them. By law, when we have a detail, we are required to pay those wages out within 2 weeks. So the town, no matter what, has to front the cash, and we hope that the vendor is good about getting back to us with the cash. Unfortunately, we have some vendors who don't like to get the money back to the town in a reasonable amount of time. We don't have much of a means to charge them interest, and that is your money, it's taxpayer money that sits in a cash bearing account that gets fronted to pay an employee who's legally entitled to those wages. And when that money doesn't come back to the town, it's sitting in somebody else's account, and the town loses the ability to collect interest on that. This would simply allow us to set up a framework where at 30 and 60 and 90 days, just like any other bill, we are allowed to charge interest to anyone not paying us for police or fire details. We currently have one vendor, they're making good on it, but is in arrears to us for close to 200 grand for fire details. Now, in this case, we'd be able to charge them interest. That is money we've had to pay out. Our employees are legally entitled to it, they've done the work. It just sits in somebody else's account instead of the town's account, and all we're trying to do is have a mechanism to just make sure that folks pay their bills on time. The town does charge a administrative fee on all details that goes into the general fund as a general fund revenue. So we make about $150,000 a year off details. The interest is really just designed at making sure that that money comes back to the town. When we close our books at the end of the year, we try to calculate our surplus revenue, we call it free cash. Money that's outstanding gets deducted from that. It does come back to us the following year, but it's money that we could need in any given year for projects that we have or funding the budget that is not there because we simply have no mechanism to pay a bill. I know everyone here pays all the bills on time, all the time. But you know, if my credit card bill was due and there was no interest for a couple of months, I might not bother paying it on time every now and then. Under state law requires a bylaw change to do so. Any questions on this? Yep.
How do we figure out how much the interest is? What
There's a
percentage?
state framework that says we can charge what we charge on like back taxes and water sewer bills. It's limited to what we can charge. We don't think this will be a problem. We're not trying to get interest money. We just want people to pay the bills. So we'd like to be able to say, hey, if you don't pay by such and such a date, we're going to start charging interest. We really don't want to have to do it. It's a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
It's just to try to get folks to make sure they're paying their bills on time. And some of the regular companies that we deal with are fine. National Grid does a lot of details. We don't generally have a problem with them. It's sometimes there's a one-off, some construction's going on, and there's welding, and you need a fire detail. It's become a particular issue lately. As everyone knows, we're under a lot of construction in town. We have a $500 million hospital going up. There's hundreds of millions of dollars worth of construction at Moderna. We have our own $150 million middle school project going on. There's about to be $400 million worth of construction going on Route 1 at FM Global. So there's a lot of activity going on, and it made us really reassess and say, wait a minute here, the taxpayers shouldn't be fronting this money and losing out on the benefit of that being in the town's account. Paul?
Does this apply just to police and fire?
Just police and fire details.
Right, it's not like if someone can't afford a water and sewer line and the town, and they pay it over time, they're not gonna get it.
No, that's all, that's a totally separate framework.
Okay.
Articles 5 and 6 are a tax increment financing agreement for FM Global. Now, we have done TIFs before. We've done 2 recently with Moderna. And all a TIF is it's an agreement to forgive a portion of a future growth in taxes. And I know that sometimes gets confusing. We agree to forgive that in exchange for investment in the community. Now, we did 2 of them at Moderna, where we forgave a portion of the growth in taxes. So we're not giving anything back. The simple explanation of how a TIF works is a company says, we're going to build a $100 building, and you're going to be able to tax the current parcel, you get $40 in tax. You're going to be able to tax and get $50, but we'd like you to forgive $1 of that growth. And we say, okay, because what are you investing? You're building a building, we're going to be able to tax it, you're creating jobs, there has to be a benefit to the town to do that. We have 7 or 8 TIFs on the books over time. They've all largely been successful. They usually build on each other. This latest one is for FM Global. They have a research facility located on Route 1. It's actually the building right next to the Four Points Sheraton. Because it says FM Global and it's got sort of that retro look, we all think they do something with radios. At least I certainly did when I first came here. They do not. FM Global is a Fortune 500 company, and they do engineering-based risk management or engineering-based insurance. They are building 3 flagship facilities. Their goal is to build 3 flagship facilities around the world. Singapore, London, and Norwood. So in my mind, we're as cool as Singapore and London, if not a little bit more so. But they're taking an existing building that's about 90,000 square feet. It is a 70-year-old building. Believe it or not, they do maintain their buildings well there. That office building is 70 years old, so it's reached the end of its life cycle. They're tearing it down and going to replace it with a 300,000 square foot building, which is going to have a significant increase in tax revenue to the town. There are going to be some additional jobs. There's going to be some job, we look at will it save jobs by continuing to invest here, because remember, FM is a company that has locations all over the world, and unlike other TIFs where you might have a situation where you're saying, well, this company's going to come here no matter what, this is a company that truly could go anywhere in the world, and they actually exist anywhere in the world. But this significant advancement, and we've done a previous TIF on the project, brings a lot of growth and revenue to the town. It's going to cement Norwood as FM Global's global training center. So that means they will be bringing their engineers from all over the world to train to Norwood. They do a lot of that now, but after this significant investment, which is estimated to be about $500 million, this is going to be their global training center. They're also leasing other space in town. Some of you know the Analog Devices site, largely emptied out about 3-4 years ago. They have leased that entire building for the next several years as temporary office space. I'd be willing to bet that it doesn't stay temporary given what they've invested in that lease, but that's good for us that a former commercial property that emptied out, we lose some tax revenue on when these properties are empty, is now going to be leased up and probably continued to use. So, the TIF agreement, we're going to focus on Article 5. As I said here, here's what a TIF does. It's just an increase in the value. So we're not taking taxpayer money out of the pocket and giving it to them. We're saying, we think this is what the value is going to go up. We'll give you a little bit of a discount on it if you agree to build here and stay here. Now, if the company doesn't make that target, they don't get that level of discount. If they think that the value is going to go up $100 million, we calculate a number based on that, but if it only goes up $10 million, the number is on a much smaller number. So we're not getting what we wanted, but neither is the company in this case. And if they exceed that number, that's good for them, and that's good for us. And there's a lot of costs not factored into a TIF. Building permits, I do believe the building permit alone for this project is somewhere around $6 million worth of revenue to the town, which is significant. And as well as additional electric, light, and water revenue. And these are the amounts here. So the 300,000 square foot building over 20 years, 25% TIF on the first 5 years. That's 25% of the value growth. So it's not the existing amount, the dollar amount value of that property. We never get less than we get today. It's just in the growth of the property. Then it goes to 20% for years 6 to 10, and it goes to 10% for the last 10 years. TIFs across the Commonwealth are all over the place. Some of them are 5% a year, some of them are 90% a year. There are some TIFs out there that towns were so desperate for growth and development, they've agreed to just give away virtually all the increase in taxes over a 20-year period just to have something there. We are in a better position where we don't have to do that. Consistently, our TIFs have averaged at about 20% over the time period of the TIFs. Article 6 is a technical correction. I'll pause for a minute. Questions on Article 5? Frank. Yep. Go ahead, Frank.
So can you go just briefly describe how that 25% number reached, and discuss maybe how much revenue is being foregone, and how does that play a role in determining what percentage to arrive at?
Absolutely. So what happens when we go to negotiate a TIF, because it is a negotiated amount, in Norwood, the Board of Selectmen created a Economic Development Commission many years ago. Steve Costello is the chair of our Economic Development Commission. He's a Norwood resident. He's here. The company will approach us for a TIF. The Board of Selectmen sends it to the Economic Development Commission, who works with the Economic Development Manager, the town manager, and we end up negotiating an amount based on what we feel is valuable to the town and what the company is valuable. We in Norwood have settled around this general amount is what we feel comfortable with. It's enough to make a difference for the entity, but we're not sort of giving away the farm because, again, we're not so desperate for economic growth that we got to give away the whole farm. But on the other hand, we want to continue to encourage growth and investment. I know this chart here might be difficult to see, but you can see that we have the base value here, what the new value would be, the building permit fees. I don't think I have the. Yep, here's the chart I was looking for. So this chart actually shows what the incentive would be over time. And I think we're looking at this $5.4 million number. The TIF averages out at 16.25%. I think it's actually a little bit lower than what we did for Moderna. So for us in Norwood, that's just always been the comfort level. There's no perfect formula as to what it can or should be. There are towns that have, as I said, 80 or 90%. There are towns that do 25%. I think TIFs can go out to 30 years. We have categorically rejected that idea. 27 years from now, nobody knows what a building is going to be doing and what it's going to be operating at. So this gives you an idea of what the incentive would be over that. Sorry, I'm pointing out with my laser pointer, Frank, realizing you're not in the room. If you look at the column that says proposed incentive, that's the amount of tax that we would be forgiving, if you will, on the increase. And then the total tax revenue is actually increased here, which is the column next to it, which is a little over $1 million in tax revenue a year, additionally, that the town is going to gain.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Tony,
Yep.
Katie Neal Rizzo asked, are these percentages discounts off projected growth that would be taxed?
Yes, it's just the growth only. It's not anything existing. So we never get less than we're getting. If for some reason, I mean, this growth is going to happen. In this case, it's a 300,000 square foot brand new building. But if we don't hit those levels, it's 25% over whatever that new growth is. It's nothing, we don't lose any current dollars that we have. It's never a dollar coming out of the budget. Other questions on Article 5? Article 6 is just a technical correction. There's an existing parcel, there's an existing TIF on that property. Whenever a new parcel is created, the state requires us to just amend the agreement. So this is just a technical correction allowing us to go ahead with the TIF for the property. Yep.
Does FM Global own 4 Point Sheraton?
They do. They own and operate it. They own, so the building, they'll call it the radio building, they own and operate the hotel next door. The training facility they have in the back, which is a really, really cool building, they own and operate that, and they own the Dedham Medical Associates building. They lease that space out, but they own that entire parcel.
Wow.
Yeah.
You say FM Global owns the hotel?
They do. Yeah. They actually they fly in a lot of their folks for training now. They stay at the hotel. I suspect that's likely why we have such a beautiful hotel in town. They're providing 20 or 30% of the business of the hotel, just them, which is an added benefit to us. Hotels are the best tax dollar, best tax value for the town. Triple tax, you get property, you get rooms, and you get meals tax. So we're happy with them. They're always investing in it, and it sort of works out great for them. It works out great for us. One Bistro is a great restaurant. Breakfast buffet there is probably the best in town, but I'm a little biased. Other questions on the FM Global TIFs? Article 7 is the opt-in specialized energy code. The state, about 10 years ago, created what was known as a stretch energy code, which Norwood opted into about 5 or 6 years ago, and it's just a higher level of energy efficiency standards for buildings that are constructed or renovated in town. Some communities in the Commonwealth for a while now have been looking at a way to require all new construction to either be all electric or net zero ready, and the state created a framework a couple of years ago allowing that. It's a code above and beyond the existing stretch code called the opt-in specialized energy code. When a town chooses to opt in to this code, all new construction, and about 6 months after we adopt it, it takes time to take place, all new construction would need to be either all electric or otherwise net zero or net zero ready. That might mean solar, that might mean being ready to go net zero. It makes no changes to existing buildings, it makes no changes to your current home or business. The existing stretch code is what governs that, mostly because of the practicality of new construction being, if you're not doing new construction, changing your heating sources is incredibly difficult for an existing building. So it doesn't make any changes to existing buildings, it's just new construction. Now there's a couple of reasons. First question comes up, well, why would we want to do this? A couple of reasons. One, the state has energy target goals that we are going to have to meet, that buildings are going to have to meet, that vehicles are going to have to meet. And the state's energy efficiency codes have been getting stricter and stricter over time to reach a higher energy efficiency. The current stretch code, which we're talking now about the opt-in code, but the current stretch code 10 years ago wasn't as strict, 10 years before that wasn't as strict. They continue to get stricter and stricter over time, and usually there's a new code and folks say, oh gee, this is going to be really hard to follow. Sure enough, give it 5 years and that will be the code that everyone follows. So before we're held to account for making some of those energy efficiency targets as a community and as a Commonwealth, this is a path to start getting there towards greener and more greener and cleaner energy. We are a municipal electric company. The more all-electric we have, ultimately the better that we're going to do. The more the electricity company can sell, the better that we can offer rates to everyone. 5 years ago, we didn't have the opportunity to do this. The state didn't have a law that did it. But as an example, if we had done it 5 years ago, or 7 years ago, I'm starting to get old, the Upland Woods complex would have been all electric. And the Avalon Bay complex would have been all electric. So they would have been greener, would have reduced natural gas requirements, making the community safer, and allowing us to have more electricity. One of the next question that people often ask, and we have a packet here that explains it, well, is this going to cost more? So the state did their analysis of new construction, and by and large, they find that the savings to the business owner or to a resident are higher with the more energy efficient code than just the regular stretch code. So I took it a step further, and I asked some of the businesses in the area. Specifically, I asked a large biotech developer, is this the kind of thing that would make you not want to build in Norwood? And the answer they gave me right off the bat was nope. They're actually trying to build to this standard in other cities in Massachusetts and towns, and they sometimes have an issue getting the power to their properties the way they want to. We don't have that problem here. We're very fortunate. And FM Global, for instance, is already building to meet this standard. So the types of companies that we would want to attract are already actually building to this standard. They want their buildings to be net zero, solar, and net zero can mean a lot of different things. The FM Global building is actually going to be a geothermal. They want to build their buildings to that standard. Now, for small businesses, if you own an auto mechanic shop, this is never going to apply to you unless you were to tear down your building and build a completely new building. It doesn't apply to existing construction. There's a regular code that impacts that. Same thing with your home. If you live in your home and you're going to live in there for the next 50 years, other than at some point in time this will become a code, you're not required to do anything. New homes would need to be solar ready, or net zero ready, or all electric. I'll pause here for a minute to take questions. I know we have to grab one online, and I'll grab one person in the audience. I think somebody raised their hands, or
Francis Hawcroft did, but what hand is Jerry?
okay.
Diane's up.
Go ahead, Diane. Sorry.
Hi, so my question is there any funds from the state to, they seem to want to promote this. Is there anything that they are planning to give the cities and towns to do this?
No, so there's no real cost to the town per se. So this is a code for all residential and commercial construction. While it would apply to the town and any buildings that we would be building, the energy savings of building to net zero or all electric would actually offset any increase in the cost of construction. And a great example of that is the middle school. Currently the Coakley Middle School is all electric. The new Coakley Middle School will be all electric. It's a larger building, and the electric cost to run the building annually is actually going to be less than it is today, despite the fact that it's a larger building, because of the energy efficiency. So I don't see a world where we wouldn't be building to this standard anyway, absent the fact that 10 years from now or 15 years from now, this is going to be the law of the land in the Commonwealth.
But I guess my question is, does it cost us more? Like, for the example you gave of the middle school,
Yep.
Would it cost us more to do that? And are there any state funds provided that would address that?
Sure. There's a variety of state grants that we're able to access as being a green community. In terms of costing more, where it costs more, the idea is that it's offset by what you're saving in energy. Remember that our electric rates are about 20% less, so the state has concluded that you will pay less for your building to operate it, whether it's a home or a business, by and large, if you build to the standard. They're using market rates, not our lower rates, so our savings are actually going to be lower than that. As for whether they intend to incentivize residential construction or commercial construction, the Commonwealth has never done that, and I don't know to the extent that they would look to do that. They haven't done it with the previous 3 iterations of the stretch code that they've done.
Okay.
Darslow, go ahead. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Hi, I have a question. The 5th paragraph down on Article 7, it says, under specialized code, all mixed-fuel residential and commercial buildings. So is that talking about apartment buildings?
Yes, if newly constructed. So remember, the optic...
newly constructed, or something that's going to go, say I have a water heater,
Yep.
and I live in an apartment building, and my water heater needs to be replaced, and it's gas. can they put back another gas, or do they have to switch to electric?
They can. This is just for new construction. It does not apply to renovations in any way, shape, or form.
Okay.
And your example is probably a
Alright.
great example of why it's the case, because if they said that, all of a sudden you'd have an apartment complex with 30 units, 8 electric water heaters and 9 gas water heaters and 2 propane, it wouldn't make sense. The state wants everyone to move towards more energy efficiency and lower carbon footprint. You have to really do it with new construction. The existing code for renovating buildings is fairly strict for energy standards, but it depends on the size and scope of the renovation. But in your case, if you currently have a gas water heater, there's nothing that changes you from being able to get a gas water heater again.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Absolutely. Jerry Hopcroft?
Thank you. Listen, there's only one question I have. I was wondering whether the state analysis had included the cost of generating the electricity when they did that analysis.
I don't think they did. They looked at the total construction costs and they estimated, I think based on the therms, what your bill would be at market rates of electricity. So they're, if you're talking about generating it on site, I don't think so. They're assuming that you're going to get that electricity from the grid. But I know they used, I think, 22 cents a kilowatt hour for their calculation, and we for residential are around 17-ish, a little bit more if you pay your bill early and you get your discount. So the numbers are comparatively better for us than they are for the general market out there.
Right, but I was concerned that generating electricity that we buy, wherever it comes from, unless it's going to run off of wind or solar, it's got to have a generation.
Correct.
Nearly all of that generation is going to be fossil fuel. And it takes a lot of fossil fuel, because you lose efficiency on it, to generate electricity. And I think there's a significant cost to generate all that electricity.
Sure, I would agree. I think my guess, and I can't speak for the Commonwealth, the analysis is looking at where changing going forward. So you're seeing a shift in the energy market now versus what's carbon free and what's not carbon free. The state is planning to bring on, the western part of the state already has a lot of solar. They're planning to bring on more solar, they're planning to bring on more wind, they're planning to bring on more hydro. The federal government has a plan to actually add more nuclear. So you're gonna have more of these carbon-free sources coming on board. And there's certainly a cost to generating that, but they're looking at the new construction going forward being all electric or net zero ready. So you could have solar, you could have compliance through FM Global's doing geothermal heat. So it's easy to say all electric or net zero ready, net zero ready, but all electric might mean, the other compliance method rather, could be geothermal as an example. Or solar. We have a relatively small community in terms of our density, so solar doesn't really take off the way here. You need larger roofs to make it work, but there's a number of different compliance measures. Henry, go ahead.
Hi, excuse me. I wonder if this is so beneficial. Why are so few communities doing this?
It just became a law a year ago.
Because there's only 18 communities in the state out of, there's 353 going different direction.
Yeah, no, that's not necessarily true. This only became a law about a year ago. And there's about 18 communities that have already adopted it. And I can tell you it's on probably another 20 or 30 warrants in town, in the state as of right now. So you're gonna see this, similar to the stretch code about 10 years ago, continue to grow across the state. Towns tried to do this 5 or 6 years ago, and the Attorney General kept shooting down their local bylaws to do it, because there was nothing in the state law that allows us to regulate the building code. We get to regulate zoning consistent with state law. We don't get to make building determinations. So the state finally created a framework allowing towns to do this based on what they've done in the last 10 or 15 years. So we'd be among the first 10% of communities in the state adopting it, but I know that there's at least a half a dozen towns in Norfolk County where it's on their fall warrant. Other ones are considering it for the spring. It's just about when the timing ends up coming up and when towns are ready to take it on and add it on. Oh, sorry, I skipped you back here, my fault.
Just a clarification on new, how would extensions to existing buildings?
They fall into the existing stretch code.
Okay.
Now, I'm sure there's gonna be somebody who's got, a 400 square foot commercial building, and they're saying, I'm just doing an addition for a 60,000 square foot building, but the building commissioner is allowed to make that determination whether that's actually new construction or not, but it is just new construction. The existing stretch code for residential properties, I think only kicks in if your renovation is 1,000 square feet or more. So that's actually quite significant. And remember, windows aren't a renovation, a roof isn't a renovation. You'd really have to gut and remodel your house if it's over 1,000 square feet, or do an addition that's 1,000 square foot. So under the current code, even if you did a 500 square foot addition for a new living room or a new kitchen or whatever, that doesn't even trigger the new stretch code.
Kind of on that point, what happens in the event of a catastrophic loss, and it's a rebuild of an existing structure? Because unless someone has like an ordinance and law endorsement, they would be eating the additional cost just to rebuild what they had.
Likely in that case, they probably would. Insurance sometimes, or I should say, sometimes the building commissioner is able to make a determination that if it's a loss, for instance, for like a pre-existing zoning issue, that you're allowed to rebuild to a certain degree, but they'd likely have to comply with the new code.
So is there an opportunity to do a carve out in the event of a casualty? Because folks would just have to be looking at adding endorsements to their policy for ordinance and law coverage.
I'd have to take a look if the state allows that. We're not able to at the local level. We're able to either opt in or opt out.
Thank you.
Paul?
So help me understand this, because I'm a little bit confused. So if you want to build a brand new house in Norway,
yep,
and it's a high-end house,
yep,
and the kitchen is the most important thing to the family,
yep,
and they want a Viking gas-fired oven, they cannot have it?
They can only if they buy it from a Norwood vendor. No, I'm kidding. They can. So all electric or net zero. Net zero means you're offsetting your total carbon footprint. So in a very simple way, you just got to put a solar panel on the roof. It is a little bit more complicated than that, but you can do it.
So you can have a gas-fired oven?
Yep.
But is it through National Grid?
Yeah.
Or is it?
We're still a gas community. You're still able to get those services. It's about when it's constructed, you're able to, you have to build it to net zero. There's other things you can do for that offset. Good question. Other questions on Article 7? All right, we're going to jump into the capital plan. Sorry.
So this would be a vote to accept the specialized, if you want to just go back. Yeah, the specialized, this would be a vote for Norwood to accept the specialized energy code. Is that what you're looking for?
Absolutely, and it would take effect in July, so it's any building permits issued after the following July, so that way nobody is sort of mid-construction and getting stuck with having to change their plans. Everyone has plenty of time to prepare. And if your permit's pulled prior to July, or will be prior to June 30th, that permit's good as long as you're doing construction for up to 2 years, so nobody's gonna have to change anything in the middle of their plans. Jean?
If we decided to opt out
You just do
instead of opting in,
Yeah.
what would the negative effects to the town be, as
So-
opposed to what we would be gaining?
Look at the next, let's say, 5 years of construction and the overall carbon footprint of those 5 years of construction. How much of that will be more green? How much of that will be more electric versus what it would be currently under the stretch code? And the easiest way to think about that is look back the last 5 years. We have had 2 large apartment complexes built with 3A zoning and a few other things. We can probably assume there's a few more coming. Those buildings being all electric is going to help us meet those carbon targets. And it's not that we're just necessarily saying we want to do that. The state has carbon targets that they're looking for communities to meet. And getting in early on a code like this will make it easier when it eventually becomes the rule. There was the stretch code, and we were a little late on the stretch code side. And the stretch code worked well. It became the regular code, and then there was a new stretch code. Then the stretch code became the latest version of the stretch code, and this became the code. This will be the rule at some point in time for all of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. This is generally how the state starts it. Towns do it. Once it gets beyond 50 or 60%, then they're able to say, well, a majority of people are doing it anyway, let's go ahead.
So it's all linked to their sustainability program?
It's one of the state's #1 goals in communities are going to at some point be forced for compliance.
Okay, thank you.
So this will help in the environmental.
Yes. I don't want to make it sound like it's just about selling more electricity, but there's a significant environmental benefit. And the best analogy, I guess, is, again, look at the Avalon Bay complex. 170, 180 units right downtown. That could have been all electric.
Frank Adams.
Go ahead, Frank.
I think that's what you might want to stress at town meeting and presenting this. The environmental benefits as well. And
Has it been estimated what the additional revenue to Norwood Light would be?
It hasn't been, because it would be, we could probably look at like an apartment complex by apartment complex analysis, but to give an example, the middle school, I think their annual electric bill is something like 300 grand. So if you're looking at a facility that size, that's how much revenue, gross revenue it generates. On an individual home basis, it wouldn't be enough revenue to lower everyone's rates, but as an electric company that needs to sell electricity, it's not bad to have more clients out there. Will, go ahead.
Here. Yeah, he's muted.
Will, can you hear us? Will? We cannot hear you.
Is he still muted?
No, his microphone might not be working.
He wants to put it in the chat.
Yeah, Will, if you want to put the question in the chat, we can always circle back to it. Other questions on Article 7? All right, moving on to the capital plan. We're going to go through each of our capital plan capital projects. We have department heads here to answer questions. This might go a little quickly, but feel free to just grab me or stop me and we'll go back to any projects. So first of all, we're going to look at the total funding for the capital plan. That's always a question. We have a big capital plan. We have all these investments we have to make. How are we looking at funding it? $2.7 million in cash, $10.7 million what we call general fund borrowing. We're going to use $2 million of the Forbes proceeds, which is really just a way to be able to transfer some of that into stabilization, which is what we wanted to do a year ago. And the state told us you can't do that. When you sell a property and you make money, you can only use it for capital investments. We tried to tell the state, but we made a lot of money on a property, and they said, well, towns don't do that, so sorry, the law doesn't, the law is not made for what Norwood happened to do, but we're just finding a way around it, and they've worked with us on that. Water retained earnings is money left in our water fund. Many of you will remember a little over a year ago, we established a water sewer fund so that all water and sewer expenses and revenues go in and out of that fund. Much like the town's general fund, it's left with money at the end of the year. At least it should if we're doing it right. But we want to spend some of that money every year on water capital to make sure water bills pay for water equipment. Water borrowing is a borrowing amount that obviously goes against water rates. Those are for water and sewer projects. And last but not least, that's the subtotal of the capital plan. We include money that's in the operating budget or money we're getting from grants in there, because when we present the capital plan, we try to make sure we're showing the whole picture, even though some of this is funded through the budget or other means. We don't want to say, hey, we're just asking for $400,000 in vehicles, knowing there's another $400,000 in the budget. We'll circle back to this after we get through the project list. So the first item is the airport safety design area. So this would fund, pave the 300-foot area at the end of the runway of the airport. These projects are federally funded. We either pay 5 or 10%. The rest is picked up by the state or the federal government. So when you see a cost up there for an airport project, that's usually just 5 or 10% of it. In this case, the FAA is picking up 90% of the cost, so this is just our share. This just paves a unpaved area at the end of the runway. It doesn't increase the types of planes that can come in. It's not going to increase the types of flights. Our airport, like any airport in the country, is rated for the types of planes that can land there. And this doesn't change that rating. It's an area that planes can use if they have to, if they're sort of skidding off the runway. The problem is it's unpaved, and paving it makes it a little bit safer for those planes to be able to not have to skid off into dirt. Questions on the project? All right. And again, we can come back to any of these. The next project is the first of 2 phases of a fence replacement. We need to replace about 20,000 linear feet of the wildlife control fence at the airport. That $140,000 is the first of 2 phases. It is 10% of our cost. There would be a follow-up phase in a subsequent year to replace the wildlife fence. I have gotten the question from a lot of people, and it's very valid. Wow, you're spending $3 million on a fence. Doesn't that sound like a lot? It is a lot. It's a wildlife fence. It runs through wetlands. It requires a lot of coordination with the Conservation Commission and the Army Corps of Engineers, as well as it's actually about 4 miles of fence. So I know we all think of our backyard and we say, wait a minute, I did my fence for X dollars. We're building 4 miles of fence. It's about 20 years old, has mostly failed, and you can see some of the conditions that it's in. We did have a wildlife strike just as early as I think September this year. Was it September, Mark? Where wildlife got out onto the runway and crashed into a plane. Next is the parking lot at the Savage Center. We've been systematically replacing all the parking lots in town. We did downtown a couple of years ago. The town hall lot, the senior center. We're doing the Oldham and the Willett schools. We've actually completed them this past summer. This would simply replace the parking lot at the Savage Center. Senior center was done 2 years ago because it was in a bit worse shape. But as you can see, it's the original parking lot to the building in quite poor shape. If you've seen the work on the Willard of the Old Ham, it'll mirror that work.
So is this just in front of the building? Is that the main entrance to the Savage Center?
It's
over
the,
on the
yeah,
left?
it's the whole lot, it's the whole roundabout.
So, okay,
The whole
okay,
hideous
that
looking,
long
yeah.
rectangular.
And we've gotten our money out of some of these parking lots, but there comes a point where it's more patch than lot. We usually do drainage improvements with these as well. There's some aesthetic improvements and some berm as well.
So while you're doing that, where are people gonna park?
We're gonna hope to take care of most of it over the summer. They'll likely park in the lawn, like we'll be able to do part of it and sort of force the park in the lawn. They'll be able to park up in the back. But we got, for the most part, both elementary school lots done over the summer. We were a little late of the gun on them, but whereas this is one lot, we shouldn't have a problem getting it done over the summer, where the usage at the senior center is lower and where there's less staff and families using the Savage Center. Next is design and engineering study for the apparatus floor at the public safety building. This is the floor that all of our engines and our ambulances sit on. It's the floor that we work on all of our vehicles floor. It's not a traditional floor in that sense. It's not just a concrete slab. The floor is heated as it needs to be. There's also a significant drainage and chemical removal system under the floor. So it's more of a piece of equipment than just the floor of a building. There's concerns that the system doesn't seem to be flushing the way it should. The heat doesn't seem to be working the way it is. And the vehicles backing in and out can sense that they feel like the floor might be disjointed a bit. So it's rather than just look at it and replace it, we do need to bring in a likely an engineer and an architectural firm, probably do some drilling, probably do some of the infrared analysis and really understand what's wrong, if anything, with the floor and what repairs we need to make sure that the floor is able to continue to hold all of our equipment.
Is that truck or whatever it is up in the air?
It is. It's up on a lift.
It's up on a lift?
It's a little hard to see, but there's these four little truck lifts, if you will, that we're able to lift up. We can lift up an entire engine with those. I stay away from the building when they're doing it, but I trust the mechanics. They know what they're doing. Questions on the apparatus floor?
Is that where the trucks just stay, that, you know, where the doors open and they come out from
Yep,
right
it's just,
there?
it's that whole bay floor, and again, it's probably the most critical part of the building in a sense, other than the firefighters, because we use it every day, and if there's a problem with it, we no longer can use that bay for fire and ambulances. And as I said, there's a drainage system, there's a chemical treatment system, there's the heating component of the floor, so it's a complicated system, and also because we use it, we can't just say, well, park the trucks out in the lot for a couple of weeks and we'll dig it up and see what's going on, and you know, facilities can get under there and look at it. We've got to have somebody come in and look at it properly. The design estimate is high because we just don't know what level of investigation we're going to need to do and whether or not we're going to need to design any solutions. It is possible we spend a couple $1,000s and somebody says, drill 4 holes, put in a couple anchors, and you're good to go, and we will wipe our brow and say we're good. Well,
so
they'll keep an eye on them.
What happens to the trucks while this is going on?
This is just design and investigative work. There won't be any major disruptions while this is going on. If we have to replace the whole floor in a year or two, we'd have to work on what that would look like and try to schedule it properly and probably get some temporary housing, not tents, but bays, yep,
Hangers.
temporarily hang or something, and do it in the summer when the weather is better, but.
Yeah, okay.
Replacement of the mechanics truck. Some of you will know we've moved most of our regular replacement vehicles into the operating budget. There are some that will remain as capital items because they come up only once in every great while. This is the truck used by the mechanic. It's a former brush truck. It's a 2007 and in time for its repair. Items like these probably won't make their way into the operating budget because a mechanic's truck generally could get you 10 to 15 years. It's also something you can generally stretch out longer. We're trying to put our regular fleet replacement vehicles in the operating budget. Next is red dot firearms. This is a firearm for police that adds a red dot sight to the arm. The police department, they're becoming the norm with the state police and police departments across the state. The police department tested them at the range, and the accuracy for officers normally shooting around an 80 or 90% went up to close to 100%. The police department actually hasn't had to come to the town for firearm purchases since the 1990s. They've been able to use forfeiture and seizure money to replace their guns on a regular schedule. I know this is certainly a sensitive topic for some people to discuss about police sidearms, but it is a necessary part of their equipment. This is what has recently come on the market. Our current sidearms can't be adjusted to include this, but the accuracy that we've seen just by testing it ourselves makes the investment worth it for the police department.
What happens with sidearms they're using now if we get these?
We get a trade-in discount for them.
Trade-in.
Yeah. Other questions? Police tasers, another item that at some point we'll work into the operating budget because we have to routinely be replacing tasers for the police department. We do field about 65 officers, and we need to make sure that the tasers are modern, that they're working, and that they're within their life expectancy to make sure that they're there when an officer needs them and that they're safe for when they need to be deployed. This is an item that, as I said, is in the operating budget, but we present it to make sure we're holistically letting town meeting know all of what we're purchasing in a certain category. Our annual replacement of cruisers, we look to replace 4 a year to try to not let the age of a police cruiser get more than 4.5 years.
Why is it in here if it's in?
So it's in the operating budget. We want to make sure when we present the capital plan, we're just showing all of what we're purchasing of an item, just to try to keep it holistic. The capital plan might come forward with, let's say, $200,000 worth of vehicles, but somebody rightly so at town meeting can say, well, wait a minute, that's not all you're spending on vehicles. So we just like to make sure we remind people, yes, as part of our overall plan, some of these items are in the operating budget. You don't see them in capital, but yes, we're buying these vehicles as well.
In addition to the ones that are in the operating budget?
Correct. Well, what you're seeing on town meeting, in the yellow sheet is in addition to items in the operating budget like this. We'll go to the question line and then we'll go to Paul. Doris, go ahead.
Hi, how many miles do we get average in 5 years on one cruiser?
Chief, or do you wanna?
Most of the mock radio cars we don't keep a full 5 years. We probably do in the area of about 20,000 miles a year on a car, per car.
So will we be able to get more miles out of the electric vehicles than the gas?
It's possible. We have 2 electrics.
Will they last longer?
They really haven't. There's not a department out there that has tested the electric vehicles on a lengthy, for that long of a period of time. We have 2 current electric vehicles. We don't have the infrastructure to replace them or to charge to convert the fleet entirely over to electric. A number of our Explorers are hybrids. We're going in that direction. I can tell you that the 2, a few people raise their hands. We'll get to you in just a minute. Oh, well, that's just one person who raised their hand several times. We'll get to you in just a minute. I would predict that in 20 years, every police cruiser in America is going to be all electric. We've seen from getting 2 cruisers through a discounted grant program that are all electric, they're not really performing as well as we would like them to perform. And that's a little bit of a challenge for us. But as for whether they'll last longer, I suppose it's hypothetically possible. Peter, I promise we'll get to you in just a minute. It's probably possible, but there's no departments out there that have actually been realistically running a large number of them for 4 or 5 years. And it's going to take us some time. We're undergoing a study to look at how we can make sure we have the charging infrastructure. There's concern that down the road, if we're not able to charge them with like a level 3 charger, which those are a couple $100,000, what's the battery replacement cost going to be, and how many cruisers are we going to need to be able to maintain once we're all electric? So we're not there yet. Give us 10 or 15 years. I think every department in the country is going to be all electric.
Okay, so the next vehicles we're purchasing are going to be gas and not electric?
We've been buying hybrid police cruisers for at least 4 or 5 years now. Yeah, so the challenge with, again, as I said, purchasing the electric vehicles, I promise Peter, I'll get you in 1 second. We don't have the infrastructure. They haven't been tested long term, and they're not, the models that are out there are not conducive for officers using them in the field yet. So we're testing a few of them, but it's going to be a while before they're completely deployable for a fleet. But we've been purchasing hybrids for probably 4 or 5 years. Peter, your question.
Just a quick one. How many cruisers are actually in the Norwood Police fleet?
Chief, about 20.
Yeah, Mach units 14. Then we have unmarked cars as well, and some motorcycles.
Thank you.
And remember, with police cruisers, we tend to replace them on a faster schedule than we would, say, a DPW vehicle. That we don't want a DPW vehicle to fail, but at the end of the day, if a DPW truck doesn't work, we can just go tow it, grab another one. Police cruisers have to arrive, just like ambulances and just like fire engines. They have to arrive 100% of the time when they're called. This is our annual pavement management program. Because we have a $2.8 million capital application, we present what we have in the operating budget for paving roads. So currently, between what we get from the state and money in our budget, we'll spend about $1.5 million of money on roads in addition to what we asked capital outlay for. Capital outlay, we're asking for $2.8 million, the fourth year of a 5-year program to get our roads into good condition. We started this 5 years ago. We looked at where our road network was. We looked at where we wanted it to be. And we figured if we could do 5 years, $2.8 million a year, we would get our roads into good condition. And then as these bonds, and this one is cash, but as the amount comes down and we increase what we spend on roads a little bit each year, we should be able to maintain our roads in good condition and be able to keep that in perpetuity, which is something that a lot of towns never actually get to. This bond and one more bond of this, and we'll actually be there in Norwood. Most of you have seen the town has been getting torn up a lot the last couple of years for construction, for roads, for water. I'd like to say we're getting towards the end of that. We're sort of getting towards the end of it, but I'd hope you also see over the last couple of years of our commitment plus this allocation from capital outlay every year that the roads are getting in better and better condition. Questions on the road project? Next capital item, $712,000 for Washington Street Hosbrook Bridge rehabilitation. This is significant repair work that we are doing on the Hosbrook Bridge. It's right down in South Norwood, right near Brookside, so I'm of course a little concerned about the traffic disruption. But we've been working diligently over the last few years to replace or repair our bridges. We've been very successful in getting money from the state. As you'll see here, 2 of the bridge projects we've done in the last couple of years ended up costing the town $375,000 for Westover Parkway and under $200,000 for the Dean Street Bridge, which was a pretty large project because we've been successful with getting money from the state. This particular project is not likely to qualify for a state grant given its size. We're certainly still going to try and hope they don't pay attention to that part of the application. But we've been successful in getting as much state money as we can to continue replacing and repairing our bridge infrastructure in town. Carol?
You said because of its size, is it too big?
Too small.
Too small.
Unfortunately. Other questions on the Washington Street Bridge?
Yeah, I guess you're gonna have to plan for the traffic to...
Yeah, it's not gonna be pretty. I mean, what we're gonna do is we'll do that, we'll do the pool, the middle school, all at once. I mean,
Yeah, right. Nobody can drive down.
if we're gonna disrupt the traffic, let's just go big, right? Yeah, it's gonna be challenging and challenging to manage, and of course, we're always concerned about the impact any of our construction projects have on businesses. So there is a business right there that we're gonna wanna be particularly paying attention to.
Tony, but the bridge will not be closed during construction.
It will not be closed.
Yeah, there's no way we could close it, but just the temporary closures and the lane closures and just the work going on tends to slow everything down. Rubbernecking is the biggest problem in traffic, so.
I think you might wanna get notices out somehow, so people can probably plan not using that Washington Street. We have ways of, if we know ahead of time, so we're not.
We absolutely do, and any type of a bridge project, we're always letting abutters and we're letting neighbors know, we're putting out public notices.
Town-wide.
Yes.
Even, because it depends on which route we would use if we know about it. That's
Absolutely.
my suggestion.
Couldn't agree more. Could not agree more.
Sorry. There's just a question, maybe Mark, assuming this is approved, what would the construction schedule be, Mark? When would you anticipate the bridge would be worked on?
Well, that's something we were talking with the engineer today, because it all depends on the schedule for the pool, how that plans out. So we'll have to work, with them, because there's going to be staging areas and parking will be removed along the street there. So it is weather dependent a little bit, because you're going to have to pave at the end. So it's going to be a juggling act, but we'll have to see how the pool project's going and fit this project in.
That end of town is getting quite a bit of construction work and quite a bit of attention, and Mr. Donnie lives down that way, so believe me, he's keeping tabs on the traffic and letting us know when there's a problem. Other questions on the Washington Bridge? Washington Street Bridge. All right. Oops, actually. Didn't skip anything? All right, moving on. Ellis Pond Dam improvements. Every 2 years we have our dams inspected, and sometimes there is a list of work that is recommended. This is the result of that list of work, about $160,000 worth of work. Repairing, resetting a tow drain, and replacing some of the seals on the center gate. Just repair work to our dam. Question?
Doris.
Doris, go ahead.
Hi, I'm wondering, is this price tag, possibly going up because it says you're going to have a professional diver check the lower level outlets. And if he finds a problem down there, well, that's going to increase this budget, yes?
It's possible. So the budget is built in with a contingency. All of our capital projects come built in with a contingency. Until you go out to bid for a project, you're never sure the price you're going to pay. And depending on the scope of the work that he finds might need to be done, there may need to be a future capital project, or it would be able to be absorbed within that budget or within the Conservation Commission's regular budget.
Are we going to be able to wait that long, though? I mean, it says that this is a class 1 hazard, and with the rainfalls we'll be getting, is it prudent to put it off?
Nope, I can assure you the dam is incredibly safe. The state does not have a completely compliant dam, I think, anywhere. This dam is in very good shape, and it's comparatively very new. That work, we'd be looking at it within the next year's cycle. If this was a critical issue, if it was an actual critical safety issue, we would just do the work. It would happen right away. We'd have to go to town meeting and move money around. But in an actual emergency, the work just gets done, absent any appropriation or any other mechanism. So it's a, I don't want to say it's low priority because we need to get it done, but this is an example of a project that we could probably skip. But then what's going to happen in 3 or 4 years, we're going to have a lot more work, and it's going to be a bigger problem. And then we could even skip it then, and then all of a sudden you're going to be called to an emergency town meeting because we have an emergency because we're worried something serious is going to happen. So really this is just very good housekeeping, making sure that when we get a report on any work that needs to get done, we get it done. 90% of these in the state realistically get ignored. But in this case, you know, there's work that's recommended to get done, we get it done.
It just sounded like it was kind of a higher priority.
Sure, it's important that it get done, but the diver's not likely to find, I mean, if you did find $20 million worth of work or something, that's not something we can just do. We're going to have to bring that back and figure out how that happens. Not that I think that would be the case, but if somebody finds $700,000 worth of work that we weren't aware of, that's a whole different approach that we have to take to make something like that happen.
Okay. Thank you.
And it's, again, this work is recommended as a result of a full inspection of the dam. Now, this is a grant-funded project. As I said, we do include these so everyone knows there are other projects going on or projects that may eventually be on the warrant. So this would be improvements to the Meadowbrook Channel. It would be a stormwater project. And again, we received grant funding for this. Would be some drain improvements to the Hennessy design for the Hennessy Basin eventual stormwater project, which will cost quite a bit more. Questions on this? One of the largest projects that we have on the plan as the general fund is to replace the traffic signals in the Washington Street and Hatton Street corridor. The whole system is a integrated traffic system. So it's not just a series of pieces of equipment that randomly operate. They are supposed to operate in concert. It's an underground system. It's about 40 years old. The parts that you see are failing, but the parts underground are failing as well, so it's time to replace the system. As I said, it's supposed to be timed in sequence. Sometimes you may know where it doesn't seem to make sense that you're at one traffic light and it's just not going and the rest of them are going and it doesn't seem to make any sense. That's because something is faulted with the system, and it's still a manual repair to send somebody out to eventually go and hotwire the system to get it working again. It is what we refer to as a dumb system. It's just a physically timed system. It's reached the end of its life expectancy. The equipment has reached the end of its life expectancy. We've patched it and paired the equipment as much as we can, and the underground infrastructure needs to be replaced. Large project, $5 million, would be a borrowing over a 30-year period to replace the system. There'd be some modern ADA enhancements that will come along with it, as well as giving it some smart capability so that we could possibly vary it if we wanted, where on the weekends it would be a little bit more pedestrian friendly, knowing that during the week, during 9 to 5 when rush hour traffic is going through, if regular rush hour traffic is a thing now since the pandemic, it seems like traffic is just all of the time instead of at predictable times. But in a perfect world, we'd be able to actually set the system so it knows that Saturday evening there's not as much car traffic, let the pedestrian crossings go twice as much or 3 times as much. But it is a large project replacing a 40-year-old system that is starting to fail. Start with Carol and then we'll go.
You're gonna have to dig up the streets.
Mark, how will the conduit work impact the streets and the sidewalks? Probably.
So the intersections will be completely reconstructed with new ramps and new crosswalks, and obviously the signals We're gonna try to make use of the existing conduits in the sidewalk. There might be some areas we will have to dig up, but it's
Replace
not a
conduit.
full-blown construction, though.
So like anything, there's no way to do construction in a public way and not make it somewhat disruptive, but we don't anticipate having to close downtown off at different times. Question in the back?
Is there going to be a traffic study associated with that? And I ask just because the system right now, there's habitually red light runners, which is scary because my little kid goes to school right there. So just timing that consistent with a study and all of that.
There was a traffic study done for the design of the system, and a properly working system will actually help us address issues like that. Ed?
So is this new system, you said you're gonna be doing a smart system, so I take it the road work, that's gonna be vehicle sensors that you're adding?
Yeah.
So you'll be adding vehicle sensors to each of the intersections on all four sides?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, it's well needed.
Yeah, absolutely. I do feel bad sometimes. I'll be walking across downtown for lunch or something, and you see one of the lights isn't working, and it's like, oof. And it's also right now when there's a problem like that, it's a manual repair call. We have to call in a vendor to come in, show up, and actually fix something. I almost considered including pictures, not that we're just doing this to replace the hardware, but one of the little walking figures is missing a leg. I think one of these stop signals gives you a middle finger. I mean, the system has lived its usefulness. It's time to go. Other questions on the traffic signal system? Oh, yep.
Tony, is it for, those three, how many intersections is it?
It's all Washington Manhattan.
So it's just
So I
that
think it's
corner.
11
11. I thought it was 10, but 11.
11 what?
intersections.
So from Pleasant Street in Manhattan, all the way to Washington in Manhattan, and then up and down Washington.
To Walpole, to Winter Street.
Winter Street, okay.
Again, that's one fully integrated system. It's just a dated one, Peter.
I mean,
Oh my
it's gonna be
goodness.
more than just at the corner of,
Correct.
Yeah.
so what streets is it gonna, are you planning to?
It's really just Washington and Manhattan Street.
Just that one intersection?
Well, it's the whole system, so there's 11 intersections there. It's not just right at the intersection of it. That's sort of the core of the system, but it's 5 this way and 6 this way.
What do you mean by, I understand.
It's each set of lights.
Uh-huh.
Each set of lights in the center. But they're all integrated as one system.
Uh-huh, okay.
Yeah, Carol, and we'll go online.
What's the timing of this if we approve this?
It'll be summer construction?
Yes.
This summer?
It's coming summer. Peter, online, you had a question?
Yeah, are we gonna do any work physically inside the intersection at Lenox and Manhattan Street? I mean, that intersection is 2 lanes wide. And there should be an island or something to break up that flow. I mean, we doing any type of work like that, I know we have to dig it up for the signals, but that intersection is a nightmare to cross, and it should be looked at for ease of response. An island in the middle so somebody can get traffic coming at you at 3 different directions, and
are you looking at
it's not pedestrian friendly at all.
Okay, you're looking at it from a pedestrian's point of view, right? Peter?
What?
You're talking about from a pedestrian point of view, right? Not a traffic point of view?
Correct.
Okay. Mark, because I know we made some changes there for the Lenox Street neighbors a couple of years ago.
Yeah, there's an island on Lenox Street on the Shaw's side, but I don't think you have enough right of way to put islands in the middle of Manhattan Street there with the 2 lanes in each direction. I mean, we can look at it, but I don't think that's a possibility.
Okay, we'll certainly look at it here.
The speed on that intersection is terrible too. I mean, they go fast and they're switching lanes when they go down to get to the Shaw's in front of the police fire station. It's a nightmare. Plus, that's another thing too. Traffic flow is horrible there too, for it going down to one right-hand lane and all that type of stuff too.
Yeah.
So
I know what he's talking about.
it's just a horrible intersection, and pedestrian-wise and road-wise, more vehicle-wise too.
I know what he's talking about, and honestly, I think it's because the road isn't marked well.
We can take a look at that.
Because if you look at all the left-hand turns, I mean, the left-hand turns come at 2 car lengths before the intersection, not when that person would actually get on and then have to worry about switching. So,
something we can definitely look at. Kate, did you have a question or?
Nope, thank you.
Other questions on the, Jean?
Please tell me this is not gonna be done until our pool, bridge, you don't want me to give you the whole
Oh, it's a
list.
whole other end of
Did you-
town. We'll find a cutter. Other questions? If we could just shut the town down for 5 months, we could do all the construction we need to do. Everyone just stay home and don't go to the grocery store.
Really, you mean my street could get changed? I'm really interested.
Another public works vehicle, coming out of the operating fund, this would be a, one of the one-ton dump trucks. We do allocate a certain amount of money in the DPW budget or the capital budget for regular replacement of DPW vehicles. The larger vehicles will likely always still come to capital outlay just given their cost. But replacement of a 2007 vehicle with 110,000 miles. This is our water utility truck, $175,000. This will come out of the water retained earnings. It's simply the utility truck that the water department uses for water work and water breaks. 2010, 84,000 miles on the truck. Small piece of equipment in the budget, but we used to actually bring these all to capital, but just a cemetery rider mower, $12,000. The street sweeper, some of you may remember last year we replaced the sewer vac truck. Originally, last year we wanted to replace the street sweeper, and this year do the sewer vac truck. We had a critical failure in the vac truck. We had to move that project up to last year and switch this project up to this year. We got the question then, well, why didn't we just do both? Well, why don't we do 5 years of capital projects all at once? We try to be reasonable about when we're spending money, and if we think we can make something last a little bit longer, we will. Sewer vac trucks are not available. There's not tons of them out there. You can't just call your buddy and get his sewer vac truck, at least not the type that we need. Street sweepers, we knew that if the street sweeper did have a failure, private vendors have them, contractors have them, they can be leased. We lose a sewer vac truck, there's no replacement for that sewer vac truck. And if you've ever needed its services, it's probably as important as a police cruiser or a ambulance in terms of needing it. We're proposing to pay for this out of water, the water sewer retained earnings. Last year we paid for the sewer vac truck out of the general fund, so it's just sort of a swap to try to make sure that we're charging water sewer to the water sewer fund and the general fund items to the general fund. Largest project we have on the capital plan is replacement of our water tanks, coming in at $14.2 million. I think as everyone knows, we get our water from the MWRA. We're very fortunate that we do. We have a virtually unlimited supply of clean water through the system. Somebody else manages the water treatment plant, somebody else manages the sewer treatment plant. We just pay for those services. It's a great deal for Norwood. The water tanks have reached well beyond the end of their life expectancy, although you are expected to get roughly 80 years out of a water tank. One of our tanks was built in the late 1950s, and the other tank was built in the late 1930s. So water tanks do last a while, but they come to a point where they do need to be replaced. They provide emergency supply to the town. They provide pressure to the town as well, so it's a critical component of our system. Any significant changes to our water system actually require DEP approval, so they are certainly happy with us moving forward with new tanks or a single new tank. We actually looked at a couple of different options. I'm not sure I have the slide here. I do. We had really 3 options. One was replace both tanks, one was replace one and rehab, and then one was rehab and rehab. Now, if we were looking to just spend short money, we would just fix both tanks. The problem with that is one of them in about 5 to 7 years would end up needing to be replaced, and then only about another 10 or 15 years after that, the second one would need to be replaced. Again, you can only modify old equipment so long before it fundamentally just doesn't work anymore. So we looked at the cost over 30 years of what we would spend in the different options, and you'll notice that this actually comes in at the cheapest, that's with the interest, the cheapest option over 30 years, because we would be replacing both tanks, and there's nothing more we need to do other than maintenance and upkeep in the next 30 years. If we just rehab the tanks, at some point they're going to need to be replaced. First the 1938 tank, and then the 1958 tank. Now, the way we're going to actually be able to fund this to mitigate the impact on water rates is through the state's revolving drinking fund program. So what this actually lets us do is we get the appropriation, we apply to the state revolving fund, the state actually fronts the money for the project, and we don't have to begin paying for the project until it's completed. Now the benefit of this is we get an appropriation today, it's 4 or 5 years from now before we actually have to raise the water rates to cover the cost of the increase of the debt service. Great for us, it's a state funded program, and it's more helpful for the water rates to wait and delay that increase, and We borrow, we go out today, once the state approves it, that's the dollar amount that's set. We're paying it back with our money in a couple of years when the money is a little bit easier, the money's worth a little bit less. So we'd be looking at, even though we're approving the project today, the impact of water rates, which it'll probably be 4% maybe on your water bill for this project, maybe 5%, I have the numbers on a slide, actually isn't gonna hit till around 2028. And these are all of our potentially upcoming water projects and the potential impact on the rates. So you'll notice that we are not actually paying for the water tank project until, if we project it out at fiscal 29, about a 4.5% increase on your rates. That's in how they look today. We don't know where we'll actually be. It probably wouldn't be much more than that. It might be that it's 3.7%, but your rate is higher, so you're still paying the same amount. So it's not a significant impact. It's certainly an impact on your monthly water bill, but we're able to delay that payment until fiscal 29, calendar 20, which is great for us. Mark, is there anything I didn't cover on the water tank project that you want to add?
No, I mean, you talked about the need for it. I mean, I know some people have said, why do we need a water tank? You said water pressure and fire flows, and if the MWRA ever broke down and we didn't have a water tank, we'd have no water. Pressurized systems are a possibility, but it'd be very expensive to build, very expensive to maintain. Water tanks are the most cost-effective and efficient way to do it. And someone asked, geez, I don't see water tanks in other towns, and just the 5 area towns, there were 20 water tanks. You just don't see them. Yeah. Norwood's the most prominent because where they're at, so it's a necessity, without a doubt.
And even then, if the high school wasn't where it was, I don't know, if you don't go into the cemetery, you wouldn't see the tanks.
Yeah.
Carol, question?
Do we use the water that's in the tank?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And one
It comes
point
into
for...
our system and goes to our houses.
Yep.
Correct.
Also, the tanks help maintain the pressure of the system.
So the water is coming from the MWRA pipes into the tank,
Mhm.
and then from the tank into our houses?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And one of the upgrades that we get is a modern SCADA system. That's the system that manually adjusts the flow of water. Right now, so that you can all take a shower in the morning, our actual water foreman, our assistant DPW director, is usually up in the morning clicking buttons to make sure that the water flow works so that everyone can take showers in the morning. It was a great system in the 50s. We're ready to move beyond that to not have to have somebody get up and make sure we can all take showers in the morning. Ed, I think you had a question?
2, actually.
Sure.
What are we replacing them with?
Sure.
That was number 1. So we've got 2 tanks we're replacing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What are we going to replace them with?
Probably something that looks like this, single tank.
So we're going to have a single tank at what size?
1.5 million gallons. There'll be 2 of them.
Oh, there'll be 2
Sorry.
of them.
2 of them, yes.
So we're going to end up with less total water storage than we have today.
Less storage, but more usable water. The problem with the other tank, which is a 4 million gallon tank, it's so much storage there, a lot of that water is not usable because of the height differentials.
Really?
Yeah, so a lot of it, and that's the other thing we deal with is water quality issues now. Water quality is really on the EPA's forefront, and we have issues with stagnant water in that big tank because it doesn't completely drain itself. So we're constantly trying to manipulate the water in it. Having these water tanks 1.5 million gallons.
The column is part of the storage?
Excuse me?
The column is part of the
No,
storage?
the storage is up top.
It is up top?
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. The second question was, we're doing the borrowing, and we're getting it covered by the state, but is there a rate we're going to pay on top of what we're borrowing?
No, we actually will pay less through the state revolving fund than we would pay on the open market. Right now, we're probably looking at any borrowing that we do being maybe, call it 4.5%. The state's about a point below that on the state revolving fund. I calculated these numbers based on what we would be going out to market with, but the state actually will pay a little bit less of a rate with the state revolving fund. The state revolving fund is funded by federal and state dollars intentionally to make lower interest long-term loans available to cities and towns for the purpose of water projects, knowing that they can be expensive. And the fund right now, as a result of some of the federal infrastructure spending, is expected to be quite flush for the next few years. So we get a better rate by going that way.
Okay. I was just wondering how that works against our current interest payments.
Yeah, it would be a whole new bond. We actually or the state borrows the money and we just cut the check every year to the SRF. Okay. So it's at a lower rate. I mean, it still shows as debt on our books. We need the authorization. That's what the, I mean, we need an authorization to go forward with any project, But that's also what the state revolving fund looks at is, hey, have you said you're willing to do this project? Yes, we've said we're willing to do the project. Okay, town meeting voted to do it. You're gonna move to the front of the line for the formula, for the grant. It's somewhat a competitive grant, but almost more of a formula grant where you're applying, if you meet the needs, you're gonna, if you don't get it in the first round, you'll get it in the second round, because the money is designed to be given out to spend. Paul, and then I think Steve had a question.
Tony, when will the taxpayers feel this?
The ratepayers will feel it in 2028 or 2029.
And at what percentage?
So that was the slide here. The estimated cost of this project, about 4.5%. And if you think about it,
because the water bills are high in Norwood.
Sure,
I mean,
I'd say
a
they're
lot of
fair.
Well, I mean, it's the sewer part of the bill. I mean, it'll kill you. A lot of
Sure.
people, you know, you hear the biggest complaint is the water bills are through the roof. But we're gonna end up paying almost another 5% on top of our bill.
This project will, yeah. As well as we're continuing lining and other projects. Nobody likes to pay water bills, but the more you defer maintenance on the system, you're paying that cost at some point in time. And then when you don't invest in the system and you start to have the quality issues, we luckily don't have quality issues at the tap. We don't want to get to a point where we ever do. Water, nobody wants to pay for it, but it's important and it's essential. And remember, same thing with the water rates. Commercial properties don't pay a different rate per se, but they still pay a significant amount of overall water rates. Home market foods is probably 10% of the water system. And there's a benefit built in there where I wouldn't say residents benefit by it, but they benefit by it. Questions on the water tank? The next item up is our annual lining program. We began this about 4 years ago in an attempt to line all of our pipes in a 10-year period. Instead of doing one large borrowing at once, we broke it out into 10 separate years, so that way we could take a pause for a year or two and focus on other work if we had to, like the water tank. You'll notice, for those of you who haven't seen it, this pipe on the left, this is what a unlined cast iron pipe looks like. This is what the pipe that your water goes through looks like on the right-hand side. We have been really aggressively going after lining all of our pipes. If we continue on this plan, we'll be done by 2029, 2030. We do plan to pause for a year or two or possibly 3 years as we absorb the cost of the water tank project. To Paul's point, to try to just minimize the increase on rates and not hit people too much with all at once. So we'll pause for a while and then restart after we've absorbed the cost of that to try to smooth the impact of water lining and water projects in general on the ratepayer. But we still would need another 5 or 6 of the annual cleaning and lining program. Questions on this? And we each year do a 10-year borrowing from the MWRA as part of this, 0 interest, but has to be paid back over 10 years. We would continue doing that even with starting the water tower project in a few years, because we wouldn't want to miss out on the 0 interest loan. The other large project we have on the docket is the rehabilitation of Hawes Pool, coming in at about $5.7 million. Hawes Pool was constructed a little over 70 years ago. The bathhouse was redone about 6 or 7 years ago. The pool is beginning to show its age, is an understatement. It does leak quite a bit into the surrounding area. Now, I like to make a joke that the stream is actually very clean, probably because there's a lot of chlorine leaking into it, but you know, the DEP and the EPA don't love those things, and our own Conservation Commission doesn't love the idea that we know that the pool's leaking a couple thousand gallons a year, a couple 100,000 gallons a year into the nearby waterway. The pool is at its life expectancy. Again, it was built in the 50s. So not a small project to swallow, but necessary to continue the pool running and up and going. You'll notice it'll look nice when it's done, but there's not a fundamental change in the overall use. It's just, again, replacing an older asset that we have and we want to continue going. Questions on the...
Tony,
yeah.
It does have a number of enhancements over the current system. I mean, you'll have a walk-in lane to this pool on the left side there where we don't have an accessible ramp into the pool. And the wading pool in between the peninsula provides an opportunity for smaller children to actually wade into a pool where it's not over their heads. So same footprint, but some design features that do improve the pool.
Modernize it quite a bit. Questions on the pool? In the operating budget, replacement of student transportation vehicles, we replaced a number of these every year. This is the tentative list of roads to be, oops, sorry, Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, a couple of things with the student.
Yep.
Are they gonna be electric? Is there any possibility they'd be electric?
At some point, yes, we're gonna be required to go all electric. We don't have the infrastructure in place at any of our buildings yet to do it. I can also tell you the special ed transportation is going so gangbusters, the rate that we're having to add students and change routes, it's gonna be a while before we're able to get there. At some point in time, the majority of our fleet will be all electric.
The other, if I may, are these gonna be school buses or are these different from school?
They're different from school buses. That's a great question. The big yellow school buses that do the bulk of student transportation, we contract that service out. This is for special ed transportation, which we do in-house. And every couple of years we look at, is it better to contract that out or do it in-house? We sometimes need to contract out some routes, but again, we don't pay gas on the tax that we buy, so it ends up being a little bit cheaper for us every time to do it in-house. Tentative list of roads to be scheduled in 2024. The DPW comes up with a list. We do have to go through the winter and see what damage the winter does to different roads, because that will sometimes adjust the list of roads that actually get taken care of every year. A question in the back?
Yeah, just in relation to the water main lining 2, is this being sequenced so that the water gets replaced and then we replace the pavement?
Yes, 98% of the time that's the goal. We make sure that the water lines have been done, the gas lines have been done, and then we pave the road. There is occasionally an emergency or something that happens that we have to go and do it, but we check with National Grid before we do it, and we align our own water lining with our own road paving to make sure that we're not repaving the road and then redigging it up. Short of an emergency, we won't do it within 3 years of a road being paved.
Tony, can I just ask one question
Yep.
on the street? Atwood Avenue where the church is.
Yes.
That is in big need.
That's in great shape, Paul.
No, I mean, we had a festival there.
It was originally scheduled for this year.
Yeah.
When we don't finish a road in a given year, it's held over to the following year and it's added to that year's road. It doesn't come out of the next allocation, the money is there. Atwood Ave is on the list.
Okay, and the other one that with the, behind Domino's, is that gonna go to the end?
We are, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there's an odd section up there that's just unpaved that we're
The
gonna.
area's changed. I mean, there's more multi-families. It's a public way. You know, tenants, people have a right to, park on the street. Right now, it's pretty chaotic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. That concludes the capital plan. We can always come back to any of those projects. We'll go on with the rest of the warrant, unless there's any other questions about any of the capital items. All right, we can always circle back. Article 9 is a public safety staffing study. This would be a third-party study of police and fire staffing. The last time we did a fire staffing study was, I think, 2011. And it's been quite a while before that since we did a police staffing study, so we want to look at both. The best practice in municipal government and in public safety is periodically to have a third-party review of your staffing and see if it's aligning with your actual public safety needs. Studies could come back and say you're fine. They can say you can make these changes. They could say you should consider adding staff to meet whatever service level you're trying to approach. If you go back to the last time we did a study, what's changed since then? We have a couple more apartment complexes. We have a lot more growth at Moderna. FM will, by the time this is done, be under construction of a large building, brand new hospital, 2 mill complexes that have seen a lot of activity. So there's been sufficient change in the last dozen or so years that it's time to take a look at public safety staffing and see where we think we should be. Questions? Yep, Gene?
Can this be done in-house, or am I really
So,
way off?
it can be, but the best practice is to always have a third party look at it. You know, it's sort of like the same reason you hire an engineer, an architect, or you do peer review. You always want to have a third party come in and objectively analyze where your staffing is and where you think it should be. In-house, we can do just about anything in-house, but you rely on a third party to make sure you have an objective look at it. In-house, we might come up and say, Gene, we looked at it, and we need 40 more cops and 40 more firefighters. And what's going to happen? Everyone's going to say, well, wait a minute. The manager and the police chief and the fire chief are saying they need 75 more guys. Can somebody look at this and take a look at it? That's why it's always best to have a third party come in and look at it objectively, because they're also looking at how you're staffed and how you staff your engines, your ambulances, your cruisers, and is that part of an effective deployment for what you want to achieve for your staffing? Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry,
Yeah, go ahead.
Does this have to go to a bid process, or do you already have a predetermined vendor? Or?
Oh, no, yeah, we have to get quotes for it.
Yeah, okay.
Article 10 appropriates money from the National Opioid Settlement. The town of Norwood, like every town in Massachusetts, was part of a national settlement with opioid companies for producing opioids. They have allocated a certain amount of money to Norwood. This will probably be an annual article that has to be used to combat the opioid crisis. We're looking to appropriate the first tranche of that money to be spent at the direction of the Department of Public Health on related activities. Can only be spent on those activities. We figure there's no better place than the Board of Health to do that. Article 11 is a transfer of funds for automatic meter money. This is money we collected last year for meters and water and sewer. We want to appropriate it to use this year. The following article makes an adjustment to the current year budget, and then we shouldn't have to make any budget adjustments for meters. Some of you may remember at some point in time the meter money just was a general fund revenue, and then it was going to a separate fund that we would take out of. We've now gone into an enterprise fund and finally streamlined exactly what our meter process is. We are undergoing a rate study. I do anticipate the meter rate will probably change as a result of that. It'll probably actually come down a little bit. This is the actual estimated annual spend on meters. So this is to make sure we can use last year's meter money this year. And the following article is to just adjust the budget so that way the money we collect for meters is in the budget as an operating expense. And we'll not have to have these administrative hurdles going forward. We'll have finally settled it now that we've gone to an enterprise fund. Questions on the meters? Jack?
Is that meters for the house?
Yes. Yep, water meters for the
I
house.
called this morning and gave a reading of my meter. I don't get paid for that.
He keeps asking.
You're not paying for that. It's to replace the meters. This is the money we use to replace the meters. We're facing one of these challenging supply chain issues where I'm ready to take a truck and drive it to a meter warehouse and steal the meters and bring them back. We can't get them in. We have switched vendors. We are offering bonuses. We cannot get meters in. And when a meter fails, it relies on us asking you to either send in a, it's really the transmitter that fails, I shouldn't say the meter, to send in an estimated reading. Otherwise, it may be reading the wrong amount. We at some point get a reading of that meter, and your bill looks like it's really high, but the reason it is you've been using 10 cubic 100 feet of water a month, and it's only been recording 3. I've never seen a supply chain issue like this where we had it with school vans for a while, and it finally got settled, where we're sitting on cash, and we just want the meter readers to come in. And as I said, we've switched vendors because we have a significant number of meters out. We're just waiting for somebody who can actually deliver them. Jean?
Unfortunately, because we have been being estimated, I know that we got a bill that was outrageous. I guess I want to say it in public. I wish that they had stretched that out a little at a time instead of hitting a household with a large amount.
So we can always adjust a water bill to work for the customer, always. If you can't call, what's that?
Eliminate?
I don't know about eliminate it. You can, if you don't get what you need from the light department does a great job with the customer service. If they don't work something out with you, just call the manager's office. Because of a meter problem, nobody's gonna be told pay your bill all at once or else.
I'm sure if we requested, they would. They're great there. But just in general, a lot of people wouldn't think to do that. And it would have been nice if it would have been able to be stretched out for everybody.
Absolutely. Was there a question? Article 13 is a pilot program for curbside composting. Trash costs are a significant cost to the town, and unfortunately they're going to be going up at a rate of 10% or more per year. We do include trash in the tax rate in Norwood, so that means you don't have to pay a separate trash bill. Because those costs are going up through the roof, and they're going up just at such an exponential rate, the town, through the Board of Selectmen and the Sustainability Commission, are looking at a compost pilot program whereby the town would contract with a company to have automated pickup of compost, hoping that if we can get the program up and running and get enough people into it, eventually folks would pay for it on their own, and composting would become a bigger portion of our overall recycling and trash collection process, because composting or food material accounts for anywhere from 20 to 25% of our total trash, or our total solid waste. So when you look at a budget in a couple $1 million, that means we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a year just to throw out old food. There's a number of towns in Massachusetts that have done this and have seen some success in it. It is a pilot program, meaning we want to sort of kick it off and get it going and make it popular and make it cool, and then everyone will hopefully want to do it on their own, all with the goal of eventually reducing the incredible amount of cost we see for trash, but also the amount of food that we're putting into the waste stream. Before I go to questions, Mr. Donnelly, you've championed this project. Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, just to emphasize the collaboration between the Sustainability Commission and the board. I think the Sustainability Commission has done a really good job talking about what are the needs just in terms of the entire Commonwealth in terms of solid waste disposal and the problems that are associated with in terms of that being a sustainable system. For the Board of Selectmen, I participated with Mr. Ryan and Mr. Mizuko on our latest contract with Waste Management, and to the earlier point Tony made, the escalation of costs from Waste Management is remarkable, and this was confirmed when we went out to bid to see if similar rates could be obtained from other vendors, and they're all very high. Currently, in our 5-year contract, even with the negotiations that we've conducted, you know, we're going to go from FY23, where our curbside trash pickup costs were about $1.3 million a year, all the way up to $2.3 million in FY28. So those rates per ton are skyrocketing. The Sustainability Commission is done some work that does kind of point to the fact that as we divert food, for example, from our trash system, we could see the way that we can control our escalating costs is to reduce tonnage. And so this is a program that hopefully will have that impact and will have very good environmental impact, as well as the sustainability people will emphasize during their presentation in November. But also from a Board of Selectmen standpoint, we need to find the ways where we can reduce the amount of trash that we're sending out. And we're doing so well, we can have some cost savings.
Carol?
Yeah, I'm just wondering about the cost of recycling and regular trash. Is
Well,
there,
yeah.
Are they the same, or is one
Roughly
higher
by
than
the with the current contract, there's really not the savings in recycling that we used to see.
Those costs are escalating too. Recycling rates have gone up for it. I mean, just, I'm throwing numbers out there, but we, totally, when we look at all waste disposal, all recycling, in FY28, that budget's going to be about $3.5 million, and that's a budget that probably in 2022 or thereabouts was more hovering around $2 million. So the price escalation is astounding, and we need to have local efforts to see how we can mitigate them.
There was a question online. Peter. Peter? Yes. Go ahead. You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, what we're trying to do, I'm Peter McFarland, I'm a member of the Sustainability Commission. What we're trying to do is the same thing we're doing with leaf and lawn debris right now. It gets picked up curbside and then taken to the to Winter Street transfer station and converted to compost. What we're trying to do is divert the food waste, your banana peels, coffee grounds, all that type of stuff, anything that's can be composted. And then the company we're talking about is Black Earth. They'll they'll have a separate container and then pick it up and then bring it to their facility and turn it into compost, and then eventually we could actually get a bag of compost back from them if the project, the program works the way it's designed to do. There's a lot of, about 18 communities doing it, and it's, it'd be worthwhile to get all that tonnage. About 25% of household waste is food scrap, so it's a sizable number that we can divert from being incinerated by Waste Management right now. That's all. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you, Peter. Thank you for your work on the Sustainability Commission. I snookered Peter into being the chair the first year, and he graciously agreed to serve, and I think he did it for a few years. Jerry Hopcroft has his hand up. Jerry, go ahead.
Is there any thought yet as to how those 500 initial participants will be selected, and how quickly we might be able to expand it?
Yeah, so our vendor that we're working with is Black Earth Compost. They're, as Peter's point, they are a provider of composting service to a number of municipalities. We will work with them to open up sort of a registration, using their registration system to recruit and have people register on their site. They're interested in becoming a member of the pilot. Then we will work with them to define the pilot group that's going to be making up that 500. Probably going to be in the most densely populated areas where we can, minimize the expense to Black Earth's model really is trying to get as many participants in a certain square mileage area. So those things are going to be what we'll be doing. We'll be having to take probably several months to do pre-registration and sorting out the pilot. If we get approval in November, we're not intending that this pilot will go forward until probably the earliest May of next year, and that will give us time to put forward an implementation plan that will hopefully get us to that initial 500 group. And the 500, the amount that we're requesting is more than adequate for 500 participants, and it will probably be enough for us to also expand the pilot as we go forward. Black Earth's model is that the more participants you have, the more you add from 500 to 800, the per household rate decreases. So there are some real incentives for upping that, upping the number of participants over time.
Thank you, Bob. And Jerry, to that point, this is a program where I'd be a little more concerned that we get to the 500 than we get more than 500. I'm not afraid of success. If we send out the registration and 1,100 people want to do it, we'll be going back to a town meeting saying, hey, there's a wait list, but this is a successful or a popular program. And again, the goal is to ultimately reduce the amount of trash that goes in that we pay for. Any question?
Will this be strictly single-family houses?
So it'll be anyone we collect trash from. We collect trash from some multifamily homes, but not the large apartment complexes. We don't do anything over, I think, is it 5 units, Mark?
6.
6 units. We don't collect over anything over 6 units. A couple of the condo units we do, but all the large apartment complexes in town, they're responsible for their own trash, and commercial properties are responsible for their own trash as well. Now, if we have a 5-unit apartment building and one person wants to do it, we're gonna have to look at that area and make sure there's enough in the area for people that want to be able to do it. Question in the back?
Would you be charging people to opt in to the composting, or is it something that
No, the goal is that it's a free program for the first year or two. That's where it's really trying to get people sort of hooked on it and hopefully that they'll want to do it. You can sign up for Black Earth right now. You pay, I don't know, $15 or $18 a month or something.
$230 a year.
Okay, well, $230 a year. So the goal is if enough people are doing it and they're successful with it, that'll bring down the rate, but eventually to have people do it on their own. If it was wildly successful, certainly we'd be able to look at whether or not there's an offset in the trash, but the goal is to just make it sort of make it as part of the norm.
Right. Well, I think people will sign up for it when it's free, but when you ask them to start paying for it, it's going to be cut.
Possible.
It is possible, but you know, most of the municipalities that Black Earth is with does do a preferred vendor model where they are seeing success with going from 500 to 800 to 1,000. I think Newton's up to about 2,600. As they're adding those households in, that I quoted 230 rate on a private pay basis comes down quite dramatically as the number of participants in a town goes up.
I wanted to say that I'm very much in favor of the program. I just think it's sold completely wrong because you have opportunities here to sell it better, not least of which is all the stuff you talk about putting into a Black Earth composting. I mean, a significant portion of that is what you put down your garbage disposal. And there's not enough information as to how much you're going to save on water and sewer by not using that garbage disposal and using this instead. Because if you're talking $238 a year, and that stops you from using a garbage disposal, you know, let's say out of 3 meals a day, if you're doing 3 meals a day and you're only using it once a day, that becomes a pretty significant water savings.
Sure. That's probably the more of my water goes from my tap to running the garbage disposal. That's a good point that we should make sure we add in some of the materials.
I mean, the value return is what's going to sell it more than I think the ecological return.
Sure. Fair point. Question in the back?
Just more of a comment. I used to live in Cambridge and rented there, and it was just, they gave you a compost bin, like they gave you trash and recycling. It's not something that I would have signed up for, but I ended up really liking it. So I think if your goal is to reduce the amount of food waste, encouraging people to do it by having the bin available is going to be more impactful than you think it might be.
Absolutely, that's the goal. Like I said, I'm not afraid of success. If 3,000 people want to sign up for it, that's a good problem to have, and we'll figure out how we pay for that and when we should. That's a good problem, and we're all for good problems. Jean?
Taking out the sustainability end of it, which is the most important.
Yeah.
How long would it take before you see any type of a savings?
Savings. So it depends on how you want to look at it. Let's say we get 500 houses and they're all producing the average 8 or 9 pounds of waste a month. You'll probably see it from a cost perspective from the town to be about equal, but if folks fund the compost on their own and they do it on their own, I mean, you'll see it almost that month. I mean, we get billed monthly on our trash collection. It's about how many people take effect and how many people are actually using it and how much they're actually doing. To Ed's point, if people might say, I really want to compost, and they're still throwing everything down the drain, which they are allowed to do. And incidentally, our bylaw requiring you to have a garbage disposal has been on the books since the late 50s, although there are still some houses in town that don't have it. If you're still doing that, you're not going to get much of a value out of it, and we're not going to see the value. Same thing, if what you throw in the trash isn't actually making its way in there, we're not going to see that value. But if people participate and they're doing it, I think you're going to see, you'll see that within a year it breaks even with us funding it, and at some point maybe we hope that it's worth doing it. And if people are willing to pay for it, that's when the town cost ends up coming down significantly. And to Bob's point, if we get 1,500 people that want to do it, it's not going to be the $250 a year. The price comes down to the point where people might say, you know what, for $8 a month, I think this is worth it. Or our cost comes down enough that we are able to absorb it and still see some savings.
Educationally, I think it's important to add, because even with the recyclables, I think a lot is being rejected because people are putting things in that shouldn't go in. So I think with this program too, it's very important that anybody get educated that is going to take part in it.
Absolutely.
Take everything, including meat. Yep.
Yeah, it's sort of the single stream of composting, if you will. But that makes it easier, because one of the challenges we have now with composting, as you know, is what can you put in, what can you not put out, and then you have a meal and it's like, okay, the bone's gonna go over here, and then this goes over here, and this goes to the dog. This makes it much easier to be able to do. We'll go, Steve, Mr. Brody, and then online.
Okay, logistics. Yeah. What is the household gonna get to be able to put their food?
A little bin and some bags, and the bin, it's really cute. It looks like a mini recycle bin. So it looks just like a recycle bin, but it's probably this tall. That's what you'll get. You'll get little bags, pop it in there, wheel it out.
Do you have one you can bring to town meeting?
Absolutely, we will make sure to do that. I happen to know a volunteer who can bring one to town meeting.
It might stink a little bit, Steve.
We'll get it washed ahead of time. Withdrawn? Okay, question was withdrawn. Question in the back.
Just on the education piece, I was part of the just informational, I literally had to collect and weigh how much I was putting, and I just taped on my cabinet. They have a list. It's a really, you can put way more than you think you could. Bones, lobster shells, napkins, like way more than you think. It's not just like the tops of my carrots or something. Right. There's a lot you can put into it. And my kids asked, can I put this in compost? They just were really good about asking the question. Now they don't even ask. So there is a little bit of a habit that you need to build, but the learning curve is they really educate really well.
Absolutely. This really is, there's sustainability goals where it's beneficial, but as Bob said, and as I've said, trash is starting to cost us a lot of money. Once it's at $3.5 million a year, if that's going up 10% a year, that's more than we project to spend on new debt service. That's projects like pools, and intersections, and other things that we need. That's a significant impact on our budget. One of the reasons the town has not adopted a trash fee, by keeping it in the tax levy, effectively businesses in town offset that cost. If we went to a trash fee, the problem is that gets assessed just to single-family homes, multi-family homes that we pick up from, but not the large apartment complexes. But all the businesses out there that pay taxes, effectively that are paying 55 or 60% of the tax levy, paying for our trash removal. That's a good thing. We don't want to lose that, but at some point when the annual trash cost increase, and this is system-wide, when it starts becoming a third of our new growth, half of our new growth, 15 or 20% of the tax levy, all of a sudden it's not, all right, what do we need for the town, for the schools, for the shared costs, and for the trash? It's going to get to that point, and we'd like to see if we can not get to that point. Nobody wants to do a trash fee to have to offset that cost in the budget, but at some point it becomes so significant, trash is going to drain other services. Other questions on this article? All right. Moving right along, just a few more. Article 14 is the search, money for a search for a new superintendent of schools. Dr. Thompson has announced he's leaving at the end of the year. Most school districts, it's in towns as well, consult with a professional search firm for a new a new chief executive, and the estimated cost is around $60,000. That's all in. That's the cost of the search firm, and any costs associated with it. This article just requests that money to go ahead and conduct that search. Any questions? All right, that comes up once every maybe 8 or 10 years. Article 15 is a request from the school department for a comprehensive review of school department student services. This would be, again, a third-party review of all the different student services that are offered to make sure that we're offering the right services at the right time, the right volume of services, and what we're doing in-house versus outside is aligned with industry standards. So sort of a good process check, and also something that might help us identify some additional savings and service levels in some of these other areas. Ed?
So how is this timed with the superintendent replacement?
They're probably going to both occur during the year. My guess is you're going to get a new superintendent in July 1st who will probably have this study to be able to take it and say, okay, this is something that we just looked at, and here's some things for me to work on year one. This will probably be concluded before the end of the fiscal year. I don't want to make it sound like it's going to wait, but stuff like this, I can tell you as a new superintendent entering, it's great to have something where you know these areas have been looked at, you've got some recommendations to work on that first year.
Right, but I guess the question is, will Dr. Thompson still be working and available to provide guidance?
Yes, he's here through the end of the fiscal year, so he will be here through the conclusion of the study. Jean, do you have a question?
Why is this under the, why isn't it under the school budget?
The size of the outside audit is likely too big to be taken out of their regular operating budget. They do have money and flexibility in their budget. If it was $5,000, I think we would say, look, go do a $5,000 study. Same thing on the town side. I could find $5,000 or $10,000. $60,000 for a public safety staffing study is just not something the operating budget can generally absorb. And last school department request, this would be for a pilot program for social emotional enrichment programs. So this would launch a social emotional enrichment program for students in grades 1 through 8. As you know, these skills are critical in helping students with problem solving, recognizing and managing emotions, forming healthy relationships, and considering and understanding the experiences of others. And to make sure it's a fair process, the committee would like to use a firm that specializes in this work, estimated to be about $50,000. So again, the school's attempting to launch a pilot program that, if successful, will help students and will long-term reduce some of those additional student services costs that we see that we know are a big driver in the special ed budget every year. Ed?
So I'm curious why it's only grades 1 through 8.
I defer if the school committee has an answer, although I don't want to say students are certainly fully formed by high school, but the idea is to focus on the earlier intervention. That way you're not having some of these challenges down the road. Not the services in kids 9 through 12 don't receive services, but when you can identify it earlier, work on it earlier, it doesn't become a problem as the students get older. Anything to add, or?
No, I think it's pretty good. Actually, the grant, so part of this is, originally we actually had thought to ask for more money, but part of it's going to be funded by a grant, and the grant was to cover some of the younger grades, and then the additional monies is being asked to actually do that expansion out to 1 through 8. So we feel like it's something that grades, it was originally really more geared towards elementary school, but really feel like that at least up to grade 8, they really could benefit from this. So more of a system-wide, a district-wide approach. If it's something that, you know, we would work into the budget, the operating budget going forward, if it is successful. And then we could look at expansion even further if it is something useful for the high school grades. But this is definitely more something to target, you know, the developing children.
Well, after having 3 kids go all the way through the program, I can tell you the problems really start at the end of grade school, in the middle school, and into the high school. So, you know, frankly, 1 through 3, it's all investigation anyway. And I don't know that a lot of strong relationships are being generated there, but as soon as you get past 3rd grade.
Yeah, I think the
becomes a whole
landscape
different
has
story.
changed,
Yeah.
especially post-pandemic.
Yeah.
We're finding that our early learners are having some challenges that are not typical, maybe that you are familiar with, and so.
No, I agree. Pandemic had a direct effect on the younger children.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
But if this is social enrichment for all students, then we're past COVID. Kids are back in school again. By the time it's effective, you're talking about kids who, at this point, have already gone through 1 through 3. You're looking at 4th graders now. And again, that's going to carry from that 4th grade group on.
So
That's why I'm
So we're
asking the
actually
question.
seeing this, we're actually seeing this, you know, as recently as the last year and this year in kindergarten. So the kids that missed out on their, like, you know, play groups and preschool years. So we are seeing, you know, and you're hearing about it, I'm sure, in social media posts and things like
Yeah,
that.
believe me, I get it from my daughter all the time, because she's doing, you know,
Yep.
preschool education and kindergarten education right now, so she gets it all the time.
So I think that, you know, we wanted to make sure that we're focusing on the children that especially didn't get the services that they, you know, and the interactions that they needed because of COVID, but that we also absolutely recognize that all the way up through 8th grade, and further, but, you know, where we can focus is on this 1 through 8. The kindergarten already has a program, and that's why kindergarten's not included in this. They have their own specialized program, but I guess we probably could go to 12 and ask for a lot more money. we gotta start somewhere.
This is a pilot, okay,
Yes.
fine. But then if the pilot works out,
It's absolutely something that could be discussed.
okay.
I would say why not?
Other questions on this particular article? All right. Article 17 is establishing a new revolving fund for the extended day program. This just establishes a fund. It doesn't put any money into anything. Currently, the school department runs the extended day program for kids who come in for an hour or two before school or after school. We're looking at transferring that over to the rec department. The rec department has never really offered after-school programming, so it doesn't compete with the extended day. The school department has asked us to take a look at whether rec could run the program for them, because it's really not a core school function. It's actually rare for a school department to run their extended day program. They're always either run by a rec department or a nonprofit. So the rec department has the skill set and the ability to run the program, but the way state law works with municipal finance, we have to establish a revolving fund now, later in the year, to begin taking in payments for spring and summer into the rec revolving fund. And then at a town meeting in May, we would close out the school revolving fund, maybe appropriate that money to make sure we carry it over. It's really just to affect the transfer of a program that the school department has asked for, and the town says there's no reason the rec department can't do it. We actually think it'll be a great opportunity for the rec department to really get kids into their programs in other areas and to really use it as a feeder program for the rec department. But this appropriates no money, it just establishes the fund, so that way if everyone says yes, the school committee and the selectmen have a little bit of work to do, but if they say yes over the winter, we'll be ready to go sometime in the spring, transferring the program over. Jean?
Do you have any idea of how many numbers of children you're talking?
That are in the extended day program? John, do you know what the total is?
It's about 330 that are registered right now, with maybe a little over 100 that are on a waiting list.
But you have a waiting list now?
Yes.
So it's pretty significant program.
It's expanded a lot since we moved it out of the Savage, and when we put it into the individual elementary schools, that opened up a lot of space, because the space was really restricted in that basement of the Savage. Staffing has been the issue with the waiting list, where we just haven't been able to get that staffing level up to get everybody off that waiting list.
So how does this help the waiting list? I mean, if we want to help the students, how does this help?
It may not directly help the wait list, but right now, the school department runs the program, and it's time from the superintendent and the assistant superintendent to try to manage a program that's not what they do. So by putting over to the rec department, they're gonna have a little bit more flexibility to be able to manage the programs and take a better look at what they're doing. When this program is busy, is generally slower times to the rec department. They've already taken over the April and February vacation programming from extended day. It's naturally what recreation does. This is what they do, and it's in their wheelhouse. They're gonna be able to probably manage the program better, not that it's not being managed well, but it becomes a significant drain in the time of the superintendent and the school administration to continue trying to manage a program. And the school committee's time. They've got a school department to run with significant challenges. This is really a recreation program in any other town, and we're saying let's just run it like a recreation program and let the recreation department run it and run with it. Hopefully we can eliminate wait lists, hopefully we can offer more flexibility. There's things at the rec department that can do, because they have a backup staff. If you think about it now, you've got an extended day director and an assistant director and a part-time secretary. When they need help, who do they go to? They gotta pull the assistant superintendent from what they're doing, they gotta pull the superintendent. Instead, they actually get access to all the rec department staff who, at the end of the day, they have more flexibility to be able to respond, to be able to help out. We know that sometimes there's a desire for early school care, and maybe there's only 2 or 3 kids that register, so that doesn't make sense. The rec department might be able to find a way to do something at the Civic Center, a little bit more flexibility than the school department has.
I wish I knew more about the numbers and the topic right now, because what I'd like to see if we're gonna do this is to decrease
Sure.
and
I think-
hopefully eliminate the wait list. I mean, if these kids need help.
There's a
they can come.
capacity issue that we have to be careful that we may not be able to eliminate it because physically the schools only have so much space for the after-school programming, but certainly that would be a goal.
That is, that is
You're
the
so
goal.
new, I hate to put you on the spot.
No,
Do
no,
you see any problems
no,
with this?
For me personally, this isn't my wheelhouse especially. I've worked with extended day programs and run them for 27 years before coming into Norwood. So when this opportunity came up, I thought it would be a great idea for the rec department. Our goal is to eliminate as many kids off the wait list and help families as much as possible. Can we get it down to zero? I'm not gonna come out and promise anybody that, because with licensing and regulations, you have to have so much space per kid for inside and outside. But our goal is to do the best that we can and eliminate that wait list as much as we can and lower it down.
With the staff you have right now.
Well, we'll also gonna have to find creative ways of bringing on more staff. We're
we're already at the ratios we can be at for the staff
Right.
we have now.
Yeah,
We
the
can't-
wait list
the
is
wait-
because
yeah.
of a staffing
Right,
shortage.
and we're looking at already, looking at doing like job fairs at local colleges and trying to tap into other areas where the rec department has more time to do it than the school department, school committee has that time. We can go out there and really get into it and try to bring it in and work with local colleges on internships to come in and work, you know, especially people that are going into the field where they need the experience.
And to
So
be
if the
clear,
right hand can help the left hand, that's a wonderful thing.
Absolutely,
Yes.
that's what we're
There you
looking
go.
at. And the program's self-funded, by the way, if it was, this, program participants pay for the program, and that's what covers the cost of the program. It's not a town appropriation to cover the cost of the program. We can give them a deeper bench to run the program with the rec department and take a burden off the school administration, the school committee, that again, very few other districts actually run these programs. Other questions on the revolving fund? Article 18 is the creation of a compensated absences fund. The way that the town is legally obligated, as is any employer in Massachusetts, to pay out vacation time due when somebody retires. We pay out sick time when somebody leaves according to a formula based on the contract. On the town side, it's not that significant. We pay out 25% of your sick time beyond 100 days. So if you retire and you've got 90 days of sick time, you're not actually getting anything. If you retire with 110 sick days, you're getting 2.5 sick days time. It's actually a fairly management-friendly policy. But we do have obligations on the town and the school side every year to the tune of a few $100,000 of sick and vacation time that we do have to pay out when people retire. We're always sort of moving money around in the budget. Those of you who have been at town meeting for a while know at the end of the year, we're always coming in saying, I need $18,000 for the clerk's office because somebody retired, and I need $9,000 for the DPW because somebody retired. What most towns do to address that issue is you create what's called the compensated absences fund, and you allocate a central line in your budget to pay these numbers out. You fund that with a certain amount of money to start. If in a given year you spend less than what you budget, that goes into the fund. If you spend more than what you budgeted for that year, it just comes out of that fund. It's just a more stable way to manage it. It helps with our credit rating because the way our budget looks when we have to pay out sick or vacation time, it actually looks like we've gone over budget. And you could argue that we have, but of course somebody retired, we're legally obligated to pay it out. Setting up a compensated absences fund stops that process so it no longer looks to a rating agency like the budget has gone over where it is because it's coming out of a fund. The money that we place in the fund, and the FinCom's recommendation is $1.5 million out of free cash. To start, we'll probably have to capitalize it again in about 5 years, but that goes against the liability in our books, which also helps with our credit rating. It also cuts down on some of the administrative time over the end of the year. Virtually every department has had somebody retire. Remember, total full-time employment for town and light and school is around 1,100 employees. So just with any organization having 10 or 20% turnover, we have people retire, we have people take other jobs. There's a lot of administrative work that goes into each department that needs money from here, and the school budget has to make 47 different adjustments that pay out vacation sick time requirement. The state, understanding this, allows cities and towns to have this mechanism. It's the same way we handle workers' comp, it's the same way we handle unemployment. We've just never done this, but it's time we take the step and do it. Questions? I think municipal finance is riveting, but I understand sometimes it can be pretty boring, so. Article 19 is an appropriation into the override stabilization fund. We had talked a year ago with some of the Forbes proceeds of putting $2 million to override stabilization to extend that override for at least another year. The money would come out of free cash. Consequently, we're using some of the Forbes money instead of free cash on the capital plan, but this would put $2 million into the override stabilization fund, bringing it up to $2.9 million, largely guaranteeing us budget stability for at least next year and then going forward. So again, continuing to do everything we can do to extend that override as long as possible. Article 20, we're almost there. This is just a housekeeping article. We're tentatively in line to receive up to $500,000 towards the Hawes Pool project that we talked about earlier. We just need town meeting to make an approval, so that way, if the state finally comes through and says yes, that will reduce our cost or cover $500,000 worth of any cost overruns on that project. So really just a housekeeping item where some state agencies require town meeting acceptance of a grant, as well as appropriating the whole amount, which is what we would be doing tentatively in Article 8. Article 21 is a grant correction, so we sometimes have 1 or 2 of these a year where money at the end of the year gets closed out to free cash. If you don't have a reason to keep the money and sometimes an email gets sent and it doesn't get missed, the state's rule is close it to free cash. You can always reappropriate it later, so you don't have money just kind of hanging out on your books. There was a grant that was closed out that was later traced that should have gone to food service, so this just appropriates money out of free cash to replenish that grant for food service because it was closed to free cash last year. And the final of our housekeeping articles, unpaid bills. Anytime a bill is not appropriately paid in the fiscal year, we have to go back to town meeting and get appropriation to pay for the bill in the following fiscal year. Sometimes this is as simple as a vendor gets us a bill late, gets left in somebody's drawer. Candidly, a lot of unpaid bills end up being when somebody retires, and then nobody could check the email where the bill came in, but the process requires us to have to go and get town meeting approval for any unpaid bills. Catherine, there's a question online.
Tony, I have to ask, there's 2 charges on the 21st of June for $75. I assume that's 2 separate charges and not just a duplicate?
Yes. Our own municipal association, if I could complain about them for a moment, is usually late in billing us for short half-day trainings, and they send us a late $75 bill for a training. Because of the way state law works, 3 people went to a training, it's 3 bills of $75 that they sent us late. We have to go to town meeting and ask for that $75. But yes, separate items. Those are, I think, MMA. Other questions on unpaid bills? All right, is everyone ready for the second warrant? Yeah. Just kidding. That concludes the presentation for tonight. We've gotten a lot of questions answered. We're still here to answer further questions. If you do have questions, you can email any of the town's department heads. You can email the manager's office, managers@norwoodma.gov. We're more than willing to spend whatever time anyone needs with us to make sure we can get as many of your questions answered prior to town meeting as possible. All the information is on the website. A recording of this will go out in a few days with a link. And as always, November 13th, 6:30, we'll see you in the high school auditorium. All right, thank you, everyone.